The whip came down fast, leather cracking through kitchen air like thunder before a storm. Clara Wynne had only a heartbeat to flinch before strong fingers caught her uncle's wrist mid-swing. "Not again," the stranger said, voice cold as January iron. In that single moment, everything changed. One man's cruelty met another's courage, and a young woman's prison began to crack. This is the story of how a cowboy's intervention sparked a fight for freedom that would shake the Wyoming dust itself. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The morning of August 14th, 1875, began like every other morning in Clara Wynne's personal hell, with her knees pressed against cold floorboards and her hands raw from lye soap. The Wynne Ranch sprawled across 200 acres of Wyoming territory, where the Wind River cut through grassland like God's own signature across the earth. It should have been paradise. It should have been home. Instead, it had become Clara's prison, and her jailer wore her own father's boots. She scrubbed harder, watching dirty water pool between the kitchen planks. The motion had become meditation over the past 3 years, back and forth, circles and lines, erasing yesterday's mud to make room for today's. Through the window, dawn light painted the Absaroka Mountains gold and crimson, colors so beautiful they made her chest ache. Her father used to wake her before sunrise just to watch that light. "Never take beauty for granted, Clara girl," he'd say. "The world gives it free, but it won't wait for you to notice." Thomas Wynne had been dead 4 years now, thrown from a horse during a spring roundup, neck broken clean, gone before he hit the ground. The ranch had passed to his brother Randall by default, Clara being unmarried, just 17 at the time, and female besides. The law didn't care that her father had taught her every inch of this land, that she could rope and brand as well as any hand, that she knew which pastures flooded in spring and which water sources ran dry by August. The law saw a girl. It gave her uncle an empire. "You missed a spot." Clara's hands froze on the brush. She hadn't heard him come in, but then again, she never did. Randall moved through the house like smoke, appearing wherever she least wanted him. "Where?" She kept her voice neutral, eyes down. "There." His boot, her father's boot, she reminded herself bitterly, kicked at a section of floor she'd already scrubbed twice. "You getting lazy on me, girl?" "No, sir." "No, sir," he mimicked, voice dripping with mockery. "Always so respectful, so obedient, just like your daddy taught you." He crossed to the stove, poured himself coffee from the pot she'd made an hour ago. "You know what your problem is, Clara? You do exactly what you're told, exactly when you're told, and you still manage to disappoint." She bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste copper. 3 years of this. 3 years of insults disguised as observations, of criticism wrapped in casual cruelty. She'd learned not to respond, learned that silence was armor. "Get that floor done. Then start breakfast, biscuits, bacon, eggs, and check the milk. I swear it tasted off yesterday." "Yes, sir." He walked out, spurs jingling, and Clara released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her hand shook slightly as she dipped the brush back into the bucket. She was 20 years old, and she shook like a rabbit in a trap. The thought filled her with shame so acute it felt like nausea. But what choice did she have? No money, no family, except Randall. No prospects in a territory where respectable women were scarce and desperate ones were common. She'd thought about running more times than she could count, just saddling one of the horses in the dead of night and riding until Wyoming became Colorado or Montana or somewhere Randall Wynne's shadow couldn't reach. But she always came back to the same cold arithmetic. A woman alone on the frontier was prey. At least here she had shelter, food, a purpose, even if it was servitude. At least here she knew what kind of monster she was dealing with. The floor took another 30 minutes. Clara worked methodically, muscles aching, mind deliberately blank. When she finished, she dumped the dirty water out back, then returned to start breakfast. The cast iron skillet went on the stove, bacon fat crackling as she laid strips side by side. Biscuit dough came together under her practiced hands. Flour, lard, buttermilk, worked just enough to hold shape but not enough to toughen. She was reaching for the milk pail when she smelled it. Sour. Definitely sour. Her stomach dropped. The milk had been fine yesterday morning. She'd used it in the cornbread without any issue. But the August heat had been brutal, and the spring house could only do so much. She poured a little into a cup, watched it separate into clumps and weigh. Spoiled, completely spoiled. Problem? She spun. Randall stood in the doorway, coffee cup in hand, eyes already narrowed with suspicion. "The milk's gone bad," she said quickly. "The heat, I think. I can ride to the Mitchell's place, borrow some—" "Gone bad." He set his coffee down with deliberate slowness. "And whose job is it to manage the spring house?" "Mine, but— And whose job is it to make sure we have fresh supplies?" "Sir, I checked it yesterday. It was fine. Don't make excuses." He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, grabbed the pail, sniffed it, then hurled it against the wall. Milk exploded across the wood, splashing Clara's dress, dripping down to pool with the water she'd just mopped. "Incompetent. Lazy. Just like your father. All talk about responsibility, but can't manage the simplest goddamn task." "Don't." The word came out before she could stop it. "Don't talk about my father." Randall's face darkened. "What did you say to me?" Clara's heart hammered. She'd broken her own first rule. Never talk back, never give him an excuse. But hearing him insult Thomas Wynne, the man who'd built this ranch from nothing, the man who'd been worth 10 of his brother, something inside her had snapped. "I said don't talk about my father," she repeated, quieter but no less firm. "He was twice the man you'll ever be." For a moment, Randall just stared at her. Then his hand moved to his belt, to the coiled whip he kept there, the same whip he used on horses, dogs, and lately, on her when she displeased him enough. "You've been needing a reminder," he said softly, leather sliding through his fingers, "about your place, about who runs this ranch." "Randall, please—" She backed up until she hit the counter. "Oh, now it's please." He smiled, but there was nothing human in it. "Should have thought of that before you got mouthy." The alcohol smell hit her then, whiskey on his breath, even at 6 in the morning. He'd been drinking in his room, probably since he woke up. Drunk Randall was mean. Drunk Randall was unpredictable. Drunk Randall was dangerous. "I'm sorry," she said, hating the tremor in her voice. "I shouldn't have spoken that way. I'll clean up the milk. I'll ride to the Mitchells." Too late for sorry. The whip uncoiled in his hand like a living thing, black leather against the morning light. "Turn around. Please, turn around." She turned, squeezed her eyes shut, shoulders hunching in anticipation of the pain. She'd learned not to scream. Screaming only made him angrier, made him hit harder. Better to take it silent, to give him no satisfaction. She heard the whistle of leather cutting air. Then she heard something else, a crash, a grunt, the sound of bodies colliding. "What the hell?" Randall's voice, shocked and furious. Clara spun around. A man stood between her and her uncle, one hand locked around Randall's wrist, the whip frozen mid-swing. He was tall, lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate little, wearing dusty trail clothes and a hat pulled low. She couldn't see his full face, but she saw his jaw, set hard as granite, muscle twitching beneath sun-darkened skin. "Not again," he said, voice quiet but cold enough to frost glass. Randall yanked against the stranger's grip and got nowhere. "Let go of me, you son of a bitch. This is my property, my niece. Your niece." The stranger's tone suggested he'd tasted something foul. "That what you call someone you're about to whip?" "It's discipline. It's got nothing to do with you." Randall twisted harder, face reddening. "Now let go before I have my men throw you off my land." "Your land." The stranger finally looked at Clara then, and she caught a glimpse of his eyes, gray as thunderclouds, taking in her wet dress, her defensive posture, the fear she couldn't quite hide. Something in his expression shifted. When he looked back at Randall, his voice dropped even lower. "That whip touches her. You'll answer to me." "I'll answer to—" Randall's laugh was ugly. "Do you know who I am?" "I know what you are." The stranger released Randall's wrist with a slight push that sent the older man stumbling back. In one smooth motion, he plucked the whip from Randall's grip and tossed it across the room, where it landed in the spilled milk. Randall's face went purple. "You're dead. You hear me? Dead. I'll have every hand on this ranch. Go ahead and call them." The stranger didn't move, didn't even blink. "I'll wait." For a long moment, the kitchen held its breath. Clara watched her uncle calculate odds, weigh his pride against the reality that this dusty cowboy had disarmed him like he was nothing. Randall might be mean, but he wasn't stupid. Whatever else this stranger was, he wasn't afraid. Finally, Randall straightened his shirt with shaking hands. "Who are you?" "Name's Elias Kane. I'm looking for work." The answer seemed to surprise Randall as much as it surprised Clara. "Work. Cattle work, ranch work, whatever you need. Heard in town you might be hiring for the fall drive." It was true. Clara had overheard Randall complaining just last week that he was short-handed, that good drovers were getting scarce. But surely he wouldn't hire the man who'd just humiliated him in his own kitchen. "You come into my house," Randall said slowly, "assault me, steal my property, threaten me, and then ask for a job?" "I stopped you from making a mistake," Elias corrected. "That's different from assault. And I didn't steal anything. That whip's right there in the milk puddle if you want it back." He tilted his head slightly. "As for the job, that's your choice. But I'm good with horses, I can read cattle, and I don't drink on duty. You'll get a full day's work for a full day's pay. I should shoot you where you stand." "Could." Elias's hand rested casually near his own belt, where Clara now noticed a well-worn revolver. "But I'll be gone before you clear leather, and you'll still be short a hand for the drive." The calculation in Randall's eyes was almost visible. Pride versus practicality. Revenge versus necessity. Clara surprised herself by speaking. "We do need the help." Both men turned to look at her. She lifted her chin, met her uncle's glare without flinching, which was easier somehow with Elias Kane standing in the room. "You said yourself we're short by 3 men, and the fall contracts won't wait." "I don't recall asking your opinion." "No, sir, but you did ask me to manage the household accounts, and I know we're behind on every deadline." It was a gamble, reminding him that she had value beyond scrubbing floors. One more hand might make the difference between meeting the quota and losing the contracts. Randall's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. Finally, he looked back at Elias. 30 a month and found. You sleep in the bunkhouse, eat with the hands, and stay the hell away from my house. That clear?" "Crystal." "And if I catch you undermining my authority again with Clara or anyone else, I'll shoot you myself and claim self-defense. That clear too?" "Clear." Elias's expression gave nothing away. "When do I start?" "Now. Corral needs mucking, tack needs mending, and the north fence has 3 breaks that need fixing before the stock wander." Randall grabbed his coffee cup, drained it, slammed it down. "Report to Hank in the barn. He's foreman. He'll show you what needs doing." "Obliged." Elias touched his hat brim, the gesture somehow conveying both respect and irony. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Ma'am," he said to Clara, voice gentler than it had been. "You all right?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. His eyes held hers for another moment, long enough for her to see concern there, real and unfeigned. Then he was gone, boots echoing on the porch boards. Randall waited until the sound faded before rounding on her. "Don't you ever contradict me in front of a hired hand again." "I didn't contradict. You spoke out of turn. You made me look weak." He stepped closer, crowding her against the counter. The whiskey smell was stronger now, sour and aggressive. "I'm letting it slide this time because you're right about needing the help. But step out of line again, and that drifter won't be here to stop what's coming. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Clean up this mess, and find some way to get fresh milk. I'm not eating dry biscuits because you can't do your job." He stalked out, leaving Clara alone in the wrecked kitchen. She stood motionless for a full minute, trying to process what had just happened. A stranger had walked into her uncle's house and stopped him from beating her, had disarmed him, had demanded a job, and had looked at her like she was worth protecting. She knelt slowly, began soaking up spilled milk with a rag. Her hand still shook, but not from fear now, from something else, something that felt almost like hope but more dangerous. Because hope, in Clara Wynn's experience, was just another kind of trap. The ranch buzzed with the day's work by the time Clara finished cleaning and rode out to borrow milk from the Mitchell's place. Sarah Mitchell, a stout woman with kind eyes and flour always dusting her apron, took one look at Clara's pale face and insisted she sit for tea. "You look like you've seen a ghost, dear." "Just a long morning," Clara forced a smile. "The heat spoiled our milk." Happens to everyone in August. Sarah poured weak tea. They were all conserving stores this late in the season, and pushed a plate of cookies across the table. How's Randall treating you? It was a loaded question. Everyone in the county knew Randall Wynn by reputation. A hard man, a drinking man, someone you did business with cautiously. But gossip and proof were different things, and Clara had learned to guard her words. Well enough. He's under pressure with the fall drive coming. Sarah's tone suggested she didn't believe a word but wouldn't pry. John mentioned Randall was hiring. Got his full crew yet? Clara thought of gray eyes and a quiet voice saying, not again. One more as of this morning. Man named Elias Kane. Kane? Sarah frowned. Don't know that name? He local? Drifter, I think. Came looking for work. Well, Randall could use steady hands. Lord knows he's run off enough good men with that temper. Sarah refilled Clara's cup. You should come visit more often, dear. It's not healthy, being isolated out there with just Randall and the hands for company. A young woman needs friends. The invitation was genuine, and Clara felt a pang of longing. Before her father died, she'd had friends, church socials, quilting bees, dances in town. But Randall had gradually restricted her movements, finding excuses why she couldn't attend this event or that gathering until her world had shrunk to the ranch boundaries. I'd like that, she said softly. Maybe after the drive, things will ease up. Sarah patted her hand, understanding in her eyes what couldn't be said aloud. The ride back took 40 minutes. Clara crested the ridge above the ranch and paused, looking down at the property her father had built. The main house, solid pine, 2 stories, with the wide porch Thomas had added when Clara turned 12. The barn, the bunkhouse, the corrals spreading out like spokes from a wheel. Beyond, pastures rolled to the tree line, where 2,000 head of cattle grazed. Her inheritance. Her prison. Movement in the main corral caught her eye. A horse, the new bay stallion Randall had bought at auction last month, bucked and wheeled, fighting the rope. And in the center of that chaos stood Elias Kane. Clara urged her mare down the slope, drawn by curiosity. By the time she reached the corral, a crowd had gathered, ranch hands leaning on the fence, watching the show. He's going to get himself killed, muttered Hank, the foreman. Hank was 50, grizzled, with opinions on everything. That horse is loco. Mr. Wynn should just shoot it and be done. Kane seems to know what he's doing, observed Pete, a younger hand. Knowing and surviving are different things. Clara tied her mare to the post and joined the watchers. Inside the corral, Elias moved in a slow circle, keeping the rope loose, letting the stallion settle. He wasn't fighting the horse. He was waiting it out, patient as stone. Easy, Elias murmured, voice carrying in the still air. Nobody's going to hurt you. Easy now. The stallion snorted, tossed its head, but the panic was leaving its eyes. Elias took a step closer. Another. The horse tensed, but didn't bolt. That's it. That's a good boy. Clara found herself holding her breath. She'd seen her father work horses this way, with calm and patience instead of whips and spurs. Randall's method was to break an animal's spirit through force. Thomas Wynn had believed in partnership. Elias was now close enough to touch the stallion's neck. He did so slowly, palm flat, making small circles. The horse shivered, but held still. Well, I'll be damned, Hank said quietly. Over the next 10 minutes, Elias worked his way around the horse, touching, soothing, building trust. When he finally reached for the saddle blanket, the stallion tensed but accepted it. The saddle came next, then the cinch, each piece added with care and quiet words. By the time Elias swung up into the saddle, the watching hands were silent with something like awe. The stallion crow-hopped twice, testing, but Elias rode the motion easily, staying centered, keeping his hands soft. After a minute, the horse settled into a trot around the corral. After 5 minutes, it was responding to leg cues like it had been saddle broke for years. How in the hell did he do that? Pete asked no one in particular. Hank spat tobacco juice. Either he's got magic in his hands, or that horse ain't as crazy as we thought. It was never crazy, Clara said. It was scared. The men looked at her, some surprised she'd spoken, others nodding agreement. Hank grunted. Your daddy would have liked this Kane fellow, had the same touch with animals. The comparison made Clara's chest tighten. She watched Elias bring the stallion down to a walk, then dismount. He ran his hand along the horse's neck one more time, then loosened the cinch. "Good boy," he said. "See? Nothing to be afraid of." The stallion bumped his shoulder with its nose, and several hands laughed. "Show off," Hank called out, but there was respect in his voice. Elias led the horse to the fence, tied it off, then noticed the crowd. His eyes found Clara's, held for a moment. She looked away first, feeling heat in her cheeks. "That's how you break a horse?" Pete asked. "Just being nice to it?" "That's how you partner with a horse," Elias corrected. "Breaking implies something gets broken. I prefer everyone stays whole." "Mr. Wynn won't like it," Hank warned. "He's got his own methods." "Mr. Wynn hired me to work horses." Elias's tone was mild. "This is how I work them. If he's got a problem with the results, he can tell me himself." The hands exchanged glances. Nobody talked about Randall that way, at least not where it might get back to him. "You got a death wish, Kane?" Hank asked, not unkindly. "Just a preference for doing things right." Clara watched this exchange, studying Elias properly for the first time. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 30, though hard living might have aged him. Lean but strong, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years under the sun. His hands, she noticed, were scarred but clean, nails trimmed short. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd been tested and survived. "Miss Wynn." Elias had crossed to the fence, was looking up at her. "Did you get your milk situation sorted?" "I did, thank you." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "The Mitchells lent me some." "Good." He glanced at the house. "Your uncle inside?" "I think so. Why?" "Figured I should report on the day's work. Hank here's been running me through the property, showing me what needs fixing." He smiled slightly. "It's a lot." "The ranch runs on hope and baling wire," Hank said. "Has for years. Mr. Wynn's more interested in the books than the buildings." It was true. Randall cared about profit margins, not property maintenance. The barn roof leaked, the bunkhouse stove smoked, and half the fence line needed replacing. Thomas Wynn had believed in reinvesting profits into the ranch. Randall believed in taking as much out as possible. "I can fix most of it," Elias said, "but some jobs need lumber, supplies." "Who do I talk to about that?" "Me," Clara said without thinking. "I manage the household accounts and the supply orders." "You do?" He looked genuinely surprised. "My father taught me bookkeeping. Randall—" She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "He prefers to focus on the cattle operations." What she didn't say. Randall was terrible with numbers, quick to spend money on whiskey and gambling, and more than once Clara had juggled accounts to keep suppliers from cutting them off. "Well then," Elias held her gaze. "Maybe we could sit down sometime, go over what's needed." Yes, that would be appropriate." "Appropriate." The corner of his mouth twitched. "That's one word for it." Was he laughing at her? Clara felt her defenses rise. She'd been mocked enough by her uncle's hands, men who thought a woman doing bookwork was presumptuous. But when she looked closer, she saw no mockery in Elias's eyes, just something that might have been amusement mixed with respect. "Tomorrow morning?" she suggested. "Before the day's work starts?" "I'll be there." Hank cleared his throat. "Hate to interrupt, but we got 3 more horses need working before supper. Kane, you up for it?" "Always." Elias touched his hat brim toward Clara, a gesture so reminiscent of her father that she felt tears prick unexpectedly. "Ma'am." He walked back to the corral, and the crowd dispersed to their own tasks. Clara stood there a moment longer, watching him rope another horse, a nervous mare this time, and begin the same patient process. "He's good," a voice said behind her. She turned. Miguel, one of the older hands, had stayed behind. He'd worked for her father, was one of the few who still treated Clara with the respect she'd once taken for granted. "He is," she agreed. "More than that." Miguel's weathered face was serious. "He's the kind of good that makes other men nervous, the kind that shows them what they're not." Clara understood. Elias Kane, in the span of one morning, had made everyone else's shortcuts and compromises visible. He'd shown them what skill looked like, what patience could accomplish, what integrity meant in practice. Men like that were dangerous, not because they caused trouble, but because they revealed it. "Miguel," she said quietly, "my uncle won't like him." "No, Chica, he won't." Miguel looked toward the house, where Randall's shadow passed behind a window. "Question is, will he do something about it?" That was the question, wasn't it? Randall's pride versus his practicality, his need for control versus his need for competent help. Clara didn't have an answer. She gathered the milk jugs, headed toward the house, trying not to think about gray eyes and careful hands, and a voice that said not again like it was a promise. Trying not to hope. Because hope, as she'd learned, was the most dangerous thing of all. Dinner that night was tense. Randall sat at the head of the table, Thomas's place, Clara thought bitterly, while she served beef stew and fresh biscuits. He ate in silence, drinking whiskey between bites, and she knew better than to speak first. Finally, he said, "This Kane fellow." Clara's hand paused over the serving spoon. "Yes?" "Hank says he's good with horses." "That's what I saw, too." "Too good, maybe." Randall tore a biscuit in half, soaked it in stew gravy. "Man with skills like that doesn't usually end up drifting for 30 a month. Maybe he likes the freedom. Or maybe he's running from something." Randall pointed his spoon at her. "You stay away from him." "I have to work with him on the supply orders. In the house, in daylight, with me nearby. That's it." His voice hardened. "I catch you alone with him. There'll be consequences. For both of you." Clara kept her expression neutral, but inside anger simmered. She was 20 years old, unmarried by circumstance, not choice, and her uncle treated her like property. Like something to be guarded not for her own sake, but for his. "I understand." "Do you?" Randall leaned back, studying her. "Because you've been getting ideas lately, speaking out of turn, questioning my decisions." "I haven't." "This morning, in the kitchen, in front of Kane." He smiled without warmth. "You think I forgot that?" Clara's appetite vanished. "I apologize. It won't happen again." "No, it won't. Because next time, drifter or no drifter, you'll learn what happens to women who forget their place." The threat hung in the air between them, thick as the cooking smoke. Clara stared at her plate, hating him, hating herself for her powerlessness, hating the world that made this her only option. "Yes, sir." "Good." Randall drained his whiskey, poured another. "Now get out. I'm tired of looking at you." She fled to the kitchen, scraped plates with shaking hands, and tried not to cry. 3 years of this. 3 years. And sometimes it felt like 3 lifetimes. Through the window, she could see the bunkhouse. Lamplight in the windows, shadows of men moving around. Somewhere in there, Elias Kane was settling in for his first night, probably unaware that he'd just painted a target on both their backs. Clara finished the dishes, banked the fire, and climbed the stairs to her small room under the eaves. It had been her childhood sanctuary, filled with books and treasures and dreams. Now it felt like a cell with pretty wallpaper. She lay in bed, listening to the ranch sounds, cattle lowing, horses nickering, the wind in the cottonwoods. And she thought about a stranger's hands catching a whip mid-swing, about gray eyes that saw her, really saw her, not as property or obligation, but as a person worth defending. Not again, he'd said. What did that mean? Not again in this house? Not again in this life? Not again ever? Clara wanted to know, which was foolish, reckless, and probably dangerous. But for the first time in 3 years, she wanted something beyond simple survival. And that changed everything. Dawn came too early, as it always did. Clara woke to the sound of roosters and the distant clang of the breakfast bell calling hands to the bunkhouse cookhouse. She dressed quickly in the gray light, simple cotton dress, apron, hairpin back, and descended to start the day's work before Randall stirred. The kitchen still smelled faintly of yesterday's spilled milk despite her scrubbing. She built up the fire, set coffee to boil, and began mixing biscuit dough with practiced efficiency. Through the window, she watched men emerge from the bunkhouse, stretching and yawning, heading toward their morning meal. She spotted Elias among them, taller than most, moving with that same quiet confidence she'd noticed yesterday. He glanced toward the house. Their eyes met across 50 yards of dawn-lit yard, and Clara felt something flutter in her chest before she forced herself to look away. She had work to do, and Randall's warning from last night still echoed in her mind. "You're up early." She jumped, nearly dropping the rolling pin. Randall stood in the doorway, suspenders hanging loose, hair mussed from sleep. He looked older in the morning light, 53 years carved deep into his face by whiskey and meanness. "Always am," she said carefully. "Coffee's ready." He grunted, poured himself a cup, and sat heavily at the table. "That Kane fellow, he's supposed to meet with you about supplies?" "Yes, sir. You approved it yesterday." "I know what I approved." He sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim. "I'll be present for that meeting." Clara's heart sank. She'd hoped for a few minutes of neutral conversation, a chance to assess this man who'd stepped between her and violence. But with Randall hovering, every word would be weighed and judged. "Of course," she said. A knock at the back door made them both turn. Through the screen, Elias Kane stood with his hat in his hands, looking far more presentable than any ranch hand had a right to at 6 in the morning. "Morning," he said. "Miss Wynne said to come by about the supply list." "Come in," Randall barked, "and wipe your feet." Elias entered, nodded respectfully to Randall, then to Clara. "Ma'am, I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all, please. Sit." She gestured to the table, then fetched her father's old ledger from the shelf. The leather cover was worn smooth from years of handling, and opening it always made her feel closer to Thomas Wynne, as if his careful notations and steady hand might somehow protect her still. She sat across from Elias, acutely aware of Randall's presence at the head of the table. "Hank mentioned you'd assess the property repairs needed." "I did." Elias pulled a folded paper from his pocket, smoothed it on the table. His handwriting was surprisingly neat, block letters, organized by priority. "The barn roof needs at least 30 shingles replaced before winter. The bunkhouse stovepipe is cracked. That's a fire hazard. North pasture fence has 3 breaks that need posts and wire. Tack room could use new leather strapping for the worn bridles, and the forge needs coal." Clara reviewed the list, calculating costs in her head. It was extensive but reasonable. These were repairs her father would have handled immediately. Under Randall's management, maintenance had become an afterthought. "The shingles we can get from the mill in town," she said, making notes. "I'll need to check our credit there. The stovepipe, there's a tinker who comes through monthly, but that's too long to wait. We might have to send someone to Laramie for it." "I can patch it temporarily," Elias offered. "Make it safe until the replacement comes." "You know tin work?" Randall's tone was skeptical. "Enough to keep from burning down the bunkhouse." Elias met his eyes evenly. "Learned it from a smithy in Colorado. Won't be pretty, but it'll hold." Clara added a note, moved to the next item. "Fence posts and wire. We have some in the supply shed, but probably not enough for 3 breaks. Miguel would know for certain." "Already asked him," Elias said. "He estimates we're short about 40 feet of wire and 6 posts." She looked up, surprised. "You talked to Miguel?" "Last night after supper. Figured I should know what resources we have before asking for what we don't." He paused. "Hope that wasn't overstepping." "No, that's good thinking." It was more than good. It was exactly what her father would have done. Assess before requesting, understand before demanding. Randall never bothered with such courtesy. He simply ordered what he wanted and let Clara figure out how to pay for it. They worked through the list item by item, Clara noting quantities and estimated costs while Elias provided details, and Randall watched in suspicious silence. As the sun climbed and the kitchen grew warmer, Clara found herself relaxing slightly. Elias was professional, efficient, treating her input with respect rather than the patronizing dismissiveness she'd grown accustomed to from the other hands. "The leather strapping," she said, tapping her pencil against the ledger. "That's expensive, and our credit at the saddlery is—" She hesitated, unwilling to admit how much Randall owed around town. "Stretched thin?" Elias finished gently. "If it helps, I can do some of the leather work myself. I'm fair with a needle and awl. Won't be fancy, but serviceable." "You're a horse trainer, a tinker, and a leather worker?" Randall's voice dripped sarcasm. "What else? Can you walk on water too?" "Not yet," Elias said mildly. "Still working on that one." Clara bit back a smile. Randall's face darkened. "You think you're clever, Kane?" "No, sir, just trying to be useful." "Useful would be keeping your mouth shut and doing what you're told." Randall stood abruptly, chair scraping. Clara, finish this up and remember what I said about propriety. He stalked out, leaving tension thick in his wake. Clara waited until his footsteps faded before releasing a breath. I apologize for my uncle, she said quietly. He has difficulty trusting people. Nothing to apologize for. Elias studied her with those unsettling gray eyes. How long's he been treating you like that? The question was so unexpected, so direct, that Clara's carefully constructed walls cracked. Like what? Like you're the help instead of family. Like you're something to control instead of someone to care for. He leaned back, but his gaze never wavered. Since your father passed? She should deflect, should change the subject, should maintain the fiction that everything was fine. But something about Elias Kane made her want to tell the truth. 4 years, she admitted. Since the day of the funeral, really. Randall moved into the house that same week, said it wasn't proper for me to live alone, that people would talk. She traced a finger along the ledger's edge. Within a month, he'd taken over the ranch completely. Within 6 months, I'd become this, a housekeeper in my own home. And the whip yesterday wasn't the first time. It wasn't a question. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, shame, anger, humiliation all mixed together. No. How often? Does it matter? Yes. His voice was soft but implacable. It matters. She met his eyes, saw genuine concern there, and something inside her gave way. Often enough that I've learned to see it coming. Often enough that I know exactly how to clean blood from fabric. Often enough that I've stopped being surprised by it. Elias's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with understanding. Why did you stop him? Clara asked finally. You didn't know me. You needed the job. Why risk it? Because I couldn't not stop him. He said it simply, as if it were the only possible answer. I've seen what happens when men like your uncle go unchecked. I've seen the damage they do, the lives they ruin. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. And I once knew someone who needed help and didn't get it. I won't make that mistake twice. Someone? Clara asked softly. My sister, Lily. His expression clouded. She married young, 17, to a man who seemed steady enough. Within a year, he was hitting her. Within 2, she was too afraid to leave. I was working cattle drives, gone for months at a time. By the time I came home and saw what was happening, he stopped, swallowed hard. I got her out. But it took too long, and she still carries scars. Where is she now? Denver. Remarried to a good man, a shopkeeper who treats her like she hung the moon. She's happy now, or as happy as someone can be after going through hell. He looked at Clara with sudden intensity. But I swore I'd never stand by again. If I see someone being hurt, I step in. That's just who I am. Clara felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. She'd grown so accustomed to isolation, to the assumption that her suffering was invisible or irrelevant, that Elias's straightforward compassion felt almost overwhelming. Thank you, she whispered, for yesterday, for caring enough to risk your job. Job's just a job. You're a person. He straightened businesslike again. Now, let's finish this supply list so I can get to work. Your uncle's already looking for excuses to be rid of me. No point giving him ammunition. They completed the inventory in focused silence. When Elias finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. Miss Wynne, if you ever need help, real help, you come find me. Day or night, doesn't matter. You understand? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. He put his hat on, tilted it politely. I'll start on that stovepipe after breakfast. Then he was gone, and Clara was alone in the kitchen with a completed supply list and a dangerous flutter of something that felt almost like hope. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Clara managed the house while Elias worked his way through the repair list with quiet efficiency. She'd see him from the kitchen window, up on the barn roof in the early morning, hunched over the forge in the afternoon heat, working leather by lamplight after the other hands had gone to sleep. He never seemed to rest, never complained, and slowly the ranch began to look less like a property in decline and more like someone actually cared for it. The other hands noticed too. Miguel, who'd worked for Thomas Wynne and knew what pride in the land looked like, began helping Elias without being asked. Even Hank, initially skeptical, grudgingly admitted that Kane knew his business. "Man works like the devil's chasing him," Hank said one evening as Clara brought lemonade to the porch where he was oiling tack. "But I'll give him this. He does it right. No shortcuts, no half measures." "My father always said there's no point doing a job if you're not going to do it properly," Clara replied. "Your daddy was right about that, and a lot of other things." Hank's weathered face creased with something like sympathy. "He'd be proud of how you've kept going, Miss Clara, under difficult circumstances." It was the closest anyone had come to acknowledging her situation directly. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you, Hank. That Kane fellow, he reminds me a bit of your daddy. Same way of moving through the world. Steady, you know? Like there's a compass inside him always pointing true north." Clara knew exactly what he meant. She'd been watching Elias too, though she tried to be subtle about it. Watching the way he gentled horses, the way he spoke to the younger hands with patient instruction rather than mockery, the way he seemed to notice things, a loose nail, a struggling gate hinge, a cow showing signs of sickness, before they became problems. On the fourth day after their supply meeting, Clara was hanging laundry when she heard raised voices from the corral. She looked up to see Randall confronting Elias, both men tense. "I don't care what you think you're doing," Randall shouted, loud enough for half the ranch to hear. "That's prime beef, and you're not pulling him from the sale roster." "He's got hoof rot," Elias said calmly. "Look at his left foreleg. See how he's favoring it? He needs treatment and rest, not a 200-mile drive. I'll decide what my cattle need. With respect, sir, I'm the one you hired to work them, and I'm telling you, you push that steer on a drive in his condition, you'll lose him halfway to market. Better to treat him now, fatten him up, and sell him in the spring." "Better for who? You trying to tell me my business?" "Just trying to save you from a bad decision." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Several hands had stopped working to watch, and Clara could see the calculation on Randall's face. Pride versus practicality again. Finally, Randall spat in the dust. "Fine, pull him. But if he dies on my dime while you're playing nursemaid, it comes out of your pay." "Fair enough." Randall stormed off, leaving Elias to rope the limping steer. Clara approached the fence cautiously, and Elias glanced up. "That probably didn't help your standing," she observed. "Probably not. But the animal needed someone to speak up." He led the steer toward the medical pen with gentle patience. "Your father, he taught you about cattle?" "Everything. I was following him around before I could properly walk, according to my mother." The memory made her smile. "She died when I was 8, and after that, it was just me and Dad. He said I had a natural eye for livestock." "You do." Elias settled the steer, began examining the infected hoof. "I've seen you watching the herds when you think no one's paying attention. You notice things, which cows are settling, which calves need extra feeding. That's not something that can be taught." Clara felt absurdly pleased by the compliment. Randall doesn't think women have any place in cattle work. "Randall thinks a lot of stupid things." Elias looked up, saw her expression, and softened his tone. "Sorry, that was out of line." "No, it was accurate." She glanced toward the house, where Randall's shadow moved behind the office window. "He's going to fire you, you know. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. You challenge him too much." "I can only be who I am, Miss Wynne." "Clara," she corrected impulsively. "When we're away from the house, you can call me Clara." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or pleasure. "Clara, then, and I'm Elias. Seems silly to stand on ceremony when we're both up to our elbows in ranch work." It was such a small thing, this exchange of first names, but it felt significant. Like a boundary had shifted, a wall had come down. "Elias," she tested the name, "you know you're making things harder on yourself. If you just went along with Randall more, kept your head down, I'd be miserable, and so would the animals." He returned to treating the hoof, cleaning infection with careful hands. "I learned a long time ago that I can't live with myself if I compromise on the things that matter. Doesn't always make life easier, but at least I can sleep at night." Clara thought about all the times she'd compromised, all the indignities she'd swallowed, all the pieces of herself she'd buried just to survive. She envied Elias his certainty, his ability to draw a line and stand behind it. "Must be nice," she said quietly, "being that sure of yourself." It's not sureness, it's just stubbornness dressed up in better clothes. He finished bandaging the hoof, stood, and brushed off his knees. But I think you've got more of it in you than you realize. Stubbornness? Spine. He looked at her directly. You stood up to your uncle the day I arrived, told him you needed help even though he didn't want to hear it. That took courage. Or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. He led the steer to water, made sure it was drinking. The question is what you do with that desperation. Let it crush you, or let it fuel you. Before Clara could respond, the dinner bell clanged. Elias wiped his hands on his pants and turned toward the bunkhouse. I should go, but Clara, he paused. That offer I made, about coming to find me if you need help, that still stands. Always will. He walked away, leaving Clara standing at the fence with her heart doing complicated things in her chest. That night, after Randall had gone to bed drunk and snoring, Clara sat at her window and watched lamplight in the bunkhouse windows. She thought about Elias's sister, about women who needed rescuing and men who did the rescuing. She thought about courage and compromise and the space between survival and living. And she thought about what it might mean to have someone in her corner who saw her not as property or obligation, but as a person worth defending. The idea terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. Over the following week, a strange thing happened. Elias's presence on the ranch began to shift something fundamental in how the place operated. The hands, who'd grown used to Randall's explosive temper and erratic management, started looking to Elias for guidance. Not openly, no one wanted to challenge Randall's authority directly, but in small ways. They'd ask Elias's opinion on which pasture to rotate, how to treat a colicky horse, whether the fence repair should wait for better weather. And Elias, for his part, never overstepped. He gave advice when asked, but deferred to Hank's authority as foreman. He worked harder than anyone else, but never made a show of it. He treated every man with the same steady respect, from Miguel to the greenest hand. Clara watched this transformation with fascination. Her father had commanded loyalty through kindness and competence. Randall demanded obedience through fear and fury, but Elias simply earned trust by being trustworthy, and somehow that was more powerful than either approach. She also noticed other things. The way Elias always seemed to position himself between her and potential harm when she ventured outside. How he'd appear with a bucket of water when she was beating rugs in the heat, or firewood when the kitchen supply ran low, small kindnesses offered without fanfare or expectation of thanks. One particularly hot afternoon, Clara was struggling to hang her washing line. The rope had frayed and snapped, and she was balanced precariously on a stool trying to retie it to the post. A shadow fell across her, and she looked down to find Elias steadying the stool. You fall from there. You'll break something important, he observed. I've been hanging my own laundry for 4 years. Doesn't mean I should stand by and watch you risk your neck. He held up his hands. If you want to tie it yourself, that's fine, but at least let me hold the stool steady. Clara felt her defenses soften. She completed the knot, climbed down, and found herself standing closer to Elias than propriety strictly allowed. She could smell him, horse and leather, and honest sweat. Nothing perfumed or false. Thank you, she said. Welcome. He didn't step back, and neither did she. For a moment they simply stood there in the afternoon heat, and Clara felt something electric in the air between them. Then Elias reached up, very slowly, and touched her cheek. His fingers came away with a smudge of dirt. You had a spot. Oh. Her voice came out breathless. I've been working all morning. I must look. You look fine, Clara. You always look fine. The words were simple, almost casual, but the way he said them, like he meant it, like he saw her, made Clara's heart trip over itself. Elias, Clara! Randall's voice cracked across the yard like a whip. What the hell is this? They sprang apart as Randall stalked toward them, fury written in every line of his body. Clara's stomach dropped. I was helping Miss Wynne with her laundry line, Elias said calmly. It had broken. I can see what you were doing. Randall's eyes moved between them, calculating, suspicious. Looked pretty cozy from where I stood. Uncle, it was nothing. Get in the house. Randall didn't even look at her. Now. Clara hesitated, torn between obedience and the urge to defend Elias. But she'd learned that arguing with Randall in front of others only made things worse. She gathered her basket and fled, but not before catching Elias's eye. a look that said, "Don't worry and stay safe," all at once. Inside, she pressed her ear to the door, trying to hear the conversation outside. "You think I'm stupid, Kane?" Randall's voice was low, dangerous. "You think I don't see what you're doing? I'm doing my job, sir. Your job is cattle and horses, not sniffing around my niece. I wasn't... Don't insult my intelligence. I've seen how you look at her, how she looks at you." A pause. "Clara belongs to me. She's my responsibility, my property." "She's not property." Elias's voice had gone cold. "She's a person. She's a woman alone in the world, and I'm the only thing standing between her and ruin. So whatever ideas you've got about playing hero, you can forget them. Touch her again, talk to her again outside of ranch business, and you're done here. Clear?" "Crystal." "Good. Now get back to work before I change my mind about keeping you on." Clara heard boots on the porch steps and scrambled back from the door. She busied herself at the sink as Randall entered, his face flushed with anger and something else. Possessiveness, maybe, or wounded pride. "I warned you," he said, "about staying away from him. He was helping me with the laundry, that's all. That's how it starts." Randall crossed to her, crowding her against the counter. "First it's laundry help, then it's secret conversations, then it's you running off with some no-account drifter and leaving me in the lurch. You think I don't know how women work?" Clara forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." "Damn right you're not. Because you've got no money, no prospects, and nowhere to go." He smiled nastily. "You're stuck here, Clara. With me. The sooner you accept that, the easier life will be." He walked out, leaving Clara shaking with impotent rage. She gripped the counter edge until her knuckles went white, fighting back tears of frustration. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the house settle, to Randall's snores from down the hall, to the wind in the cottonwoods. Around midnight, she gave up and crept downstairs in her nightgown and robe, thinking a cup of tea might calm her nerves. She was sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around warm ceramic, when a soft knock came at the back door. Her heart leaped. She knew somehow who it would be before she even looked. Elias stood outside, illuminated by moonlight, concern written in every line of his face. Clara unlocked the door and pulled it open. "What are you doing here?" she whispered urgently. "If Randall finds you, I had to make sure you were all right, after this afternoon." He stayed on the threshold, not presuming entry. "I heard him shouting at you through the window." "I'm fine, but you shouldn't be here. He meant what he said about firing you." "I meant what I said too." Elias's voice was quiet but firm. "About helping if you need it. Do you need it, Clara? Because if you want to leave this place, I'll help you go. Tonight, tomorrow, whenever you say the word." The offer hung between them, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Clara thought about leaving, just walking away from the ranch, from Randall, from this life that had become a cage. But where would she go? What would she do? A woman alone on the frontier was vulnerable in ways she couldn't quite bring herself to articulate, even in her own mind. "I can't," she said finally. "This ranch, it's all I have left of my father. And despite everything, it's still half mine legally. If I leave, Randall gets it all. There are ways around that, legal ways. My sister, she had a lawyer in Denver help her. Lawyers cost money I don't have." Clara felt tears threaten again. "I'm trapped, Elias. Not by bars or chains, but by circumstance and law, and the simple fact that women don't get many choices in this world." "Then we change your circumstances." He said it like it was simple, like determination alone could reshape reality. "I've been thinking about this. Randall's skimming profits. I can tell from the condition of the ranch versus what the cattle operation should be earning. If we could prove he's cheating you out of your inheritance..." "How?" "He keeps the books locked in his office. I'm not even allowed to see them." A slow smile crossed Elias's face. "But I bet you know where he keeps the key." Clara's breath caught. "You're talking about theft. If he caught us, he won't. I'm good at moving quiet." Elias leaned against the doorframe, casual, despite the tension thrumming between them. "I'm not saying we do it tonight, but think about it, Clara. Real evidence of wrongdoing might give you leverage, might give you options, or might get us both killed. There's that risk, yes. He met her eyes in the moonlight. But sometimes risk is the price of freedom. Question is whether you're willing to pay it. Clara thought about 4 years of servitude, of swallowed pride and hidden bruises. She thought about the whip whistling through air and Elias's hand catching it. She thought about her father's ranch slowly falling apart under Randall's mismanagement while she scrubbed floors and lived like a prisoner in her own home. If we did this, she said slowly, and we found proof, what then? Then we take it to the territorial judge in Laramie, file for a partition of the property, or force Randall to buy you out at fair value, or press charges if the theft is bad enough. Elias's voice was calm, methodical. I won't lie. It would be messy. But it would be a way out. And what's in this for you? Clara had to ask. Why risk your neck for someone you barely know? Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try. He said it simply, like it was the only truth that mattered. And because you remind me of my sister before she got free. That look in your eyes like you're drowning, but everyone's pretending you're fine. The comparison should have offended Clara, but instead it felt validating. Someone finally saw what she'd been trying to hide. I need to think about it, she said. Take all the time you need. But Clara? He straightened, preparing to leave. Don't think too long. Men like Randall, they get worse, not better. Whatever cruelty he's shown you so far, it'll escalate. That's just how their kind works. He was right. She knew he was right. The violence had been increasing, more frequent, more vicious, less provoked. Last month, Randall had dislocated her shoulder when she'd burned his breakfast. The month before, a split lip for accidentally interrupting his poker game. How long before he really hurt her? How long before one of his drunken rages went too far? I'll think about it, she repeated. Now please go, before someone sees you. Elias nodded and melted back into the shadows. Clara locked the door behind him, but her hands were shaking, not with fear this time, but with possibility. For the first time in 4 years, she allowed herself to imagine a different future. One where she wasn't afraid, wasn't powerless, wasn't trapped. One where she was free. The thought kept her awake until dawn, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The decision came to Clara 3 days later, though in truth it had been forming since the moment Elias disappeared into the moonlit yard. She made it while scrubbing blood from her sleeve, her own blood this time, from where Randall had grabbed her arm hard enough to reopen an old cut. He'd been drunk again, angry about something trivial, and his fingers had found the exact spot where previous bruises were still healing. She stood at the wash basin, watching red swirl into soapy water, and something inside her simply broke. Or maybe it finally healed. Either way, when she looked up at her reflection in the small mirror above the sink, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Pale, hollow-eyed, 20 years old, but looking 30. This wasn't living. This was dying by degrees. She found Elias that afternoon in the barn, working on a saddle that had seen better days. The leather was cracked and dry, but his hands moved over it with patient skill, rubbing oil into every seam and crease. He looked up when her shadow fell across the workbench. Clara. His eyes went immediately to her bandaged arm. What happened? The usual. She kept her voice steady. I need to talk to you, somewhere private. He set down the saddle immediately, glanced around the barn. 2 hands were mucking stalls at the far end, out of earshot, but not out of sight. The old line shack up on the ridge. You know it? She nodded. Her father had built it years ago as shelter for hands working the high pastures. It had been abandoned for seasons now, too remote for regular use. Give me an hour, Elias said quietly. I'll tell Hank I'm riding fence up that way. You can say you're gathering herbs. I've seen you do that before. All right. Claire's heart was already racing. An hour. She forced herself to move through the next 60 minutes normally. She made bread, started stew for supper, swept the porch. When Randall emerged from his office, where he'd been drinking and reviewing account books he'd never let her see, she told him she was going to gather wild mint and sage from the ridge meadow. Don't be gone long, he said without looking up from his whiskey. I want supper at 6 sharp. Yes, sir? She collected her gathering basket and set off on foot, following the trail that wound up through pine and aspen toward the high country. The August afternoon was hot but bearable under the tree cover, and the walk gave her time to think. To second guess, to wonder if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. But then she touched her bandaged arm and remembered the look on Randall's face as he'd hurt her. Satisfaction mixed with contempt, like she was an animal that needed reminding who held the leash. And her resolve hardened. The line shack appeared through the trees, weathered logs and a sagging roof, but still structurally sound. Elias's horse was tied nearby, cropping grass contentedly. Clara climbed the creaking steps and pushed open the door. Inside was dim and dusty, furnished with only a rough table, a couple of stools, and a stone fireplace that hadn't seen flame in years. Elias stood by the single window, backlit by filtered sunlight, and turned when she entered. "You came. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might change your mind. It wouldn't be unreasonable." He gestured to one of the stools. "Sit, please." Clara sat, suddenly nervous now that the moment had arrived. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the ledgers, about finding proof. And I want to do it. I want to know the truth about what Randall's been doing." She met his eyes. "But more than that, I want out. I want my life back. I want to stop being afraid in my own home." Elias's expression softened. "That takes courage to say out loud. It takes desperation. But maybe you're right. Maybe they're the same thing." She twisted her hands together. "The key to his office is in his room, in the top drawer of his dresser. He keeps it on a ring with 3 other keys, one for the safe, one for the liquor cabinet, one I don't know what it opens." "Does he lock his bedroom door?" "At night, yes. But during the day when he's outside or in town, it's usually open. He's careless that way. Never expects anyone would dare go through his things." "When's the next time he'll be gone long enough for us to look?" Clara thought. "Saturday. He always rides into town for poker at the saloon. Leaves around noon, doesn't come back until well after dark. Sometimes he stays overnight if he's too drunk to ride." "That's 4 days from now." Elias began pacing, thinking out loud. "Saturday afternoon, then. You get the keys while I keep watch outside. We photograph the ledgers. I've got a friend in town who owes me a favor, has one of those new portable cameras. Even if Randall notices the books have been moved, he won't know we have copies." "Photograph them?" Claire had heard of such things but never seen it done. "Fastest way to get evidence without stealing the originals. Takes special equipment, but like I said, I know someone." He stopped pacing, looked at her seriously. "Clara, once we do this, there's no going back. If Randall finds out, he'll be dangerous. More dangerous than he's ever been." "I know." "Do you?" Elias crossed to her, crouched so they were eye level. "I mean, really no. Because I need you to understand what we're risking. At best, he'll fire me and throw you out with nothing. At worst—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Clara thought about the rifle Randall kept over the mantel, the way his temper could turn violent in a heartbeat, the isolation of the ranch where anything could happen and no one would know until it was too late. She thought about all of this and still felt that strange, fierce certainty burning in her chest. "I know the risks, and I'm willing to take them." She reached out, touched Elias's hand where it rested on his knee. "Are you?" His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused and solid. "I wouldn't have suggested it if I wasn't, but I needed to be sure you understood what you're agreeing to." "I understand." She paused, then asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Elias, why are you really doing this? And don't say it's because of your sister. There's something else." He was quiet for a long moment, studying their joined hands. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "You want the truth? I'm doing it because in the 2 weeks I've known you, you've become important to me. More important than is probably wise, given the circumstances. But I can't stand by and watch you suffer. Can't sleep knowing you're in that house with a man who hurts you. Can't pretend everything's fine when it's so clearly not." Clara's breath caught. "Elias, I'm not asking for anything in return," he continued quickly. "I'm not expecting gratitude or affection or any kind of obligation. If we pull this off and you want to leave Wyoming, start fresh somewhere far from here, I'll help you go and never ask for more than your friendship. But I need you to know that my reasons aren't purely altruistic. They're personal. You're personal to me." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable in a way Clara hadn't expected. She'd assumed his motives were pure chivalry, the same instinct that made him gentle horses and fix broken things. But this was different. This was about her specifically, about something growing between them that neither had quite named yet. "You've become important to me too," she admitted softly. "I didn't want you to be. It's complicated and dangerous and probably foolish, but you are." They sat there in the dusty lined shack, hands clasped, acknowledging what had been building since the morning he'd caught her uncle's whip. It wasn't love, not yet. Too soon for that, too much uncertainty. But it was something real and strong, a connection that felt like the first honest thing in Clara's life for years. Finally, Elias cleared his throat. "Saturday, then. We do this Saturday." "Saturday," Clara agreed. They spent another hour planning details. Where Clara would hide the keys once she got them, how Elias would signal if anyone approached, what story they'd tell if caught. It felt surreal, plotting theft and deception in the place her father had built as shelter for honest work. But then again, maybe this was honest work too, fighting for what was rightfully hers. When the sun started its descent toward the mountains, Clara gathered her basket. "I should get back. I told Randall I was gathering herbs." "Take some on your way down," Elias suggested. "Make the story true." She paused at the door. "Elias? Thank you for all of this. Thank me when we're both safe and you're free. Until then, we're just getting started." The walk back down the mountain took longer because Clara stopped to collect mint and sage, yarrow and wild thyme, her basket filled with green and fragrant proof of her alibi. But her mind was full of Saturday, of ledgers and cameras, and the possibility of freedom. That night at supper, Randall was in an unusually good mood. He'd sold a string of horses for better than expected prices, and the whiskey had made him expansive rather than mean. "We might actually make a profit this year," he said, sawing through his steak. "Assuming the fall drive goes well and we don't lose too many head." Clara served him potatoes and kept her expression neutral. "That's good news." "Damn right it's good news. Means I can finally buy that breeding bull I've had my eye on." He gestured with his fork. "Your father never understood investment, always putting money back into repairs and wages instead of growing the operation." It took every ounce of Clara's self-control not to respond. Her father had built this ranch from nothing through careful stewardship and fair dealing. Randall was bleeding it dry through neglect and greed, but she bit her tongue and let him talk, storing away every boast and admission for the reckoning to come. After dinner, she cleaned up while Randall retreated to his office with a bottle. She could hear him shuffling papers, muttering to himself, occasionally laughing at private jokes. The sounds made her skin crawl, but she focused on the work at hand. 4 more days. Just 4 more days. Wednesday brought rain, the kind of steady drizzle that turned the ranch yard into mud and kept everyone working under cover. Clara spent the morning mending clothes and the afternoon making preserves from the last of the summer berries. Through the kitchen window, she watched Elias working in the barn with Miguel, the two of them repairing tack by lantern light. She'd barely spoken to him since their meeting at the line shack, conscious of Randall's watchful eyes and suspicious nature. But sometimes she'd feel Elias looking at her across the distance, and the knowledge that someone saw her, really saw her, beyond the drudgery and fear, kept her going through the endless domestic tasks. Thursday, one of the young hands got kicked by a horse. It wasn't serious, just a badly bruised shin, but Hank sent him to Clara for doctoring. She cleaned and bandaged the wound in the kitchen while the boy, barely 18 named Tommy, tried not to cry. "You're lucky it's not broken," she said gently. "Keep weight off it for a few days and it should heal fine." "Thank you, Miss Clara." Tommy's face was pale with pain. "You're good at this. Better than any doc I've seen. My mother taught me before she died. Said a ranch woman needs to know healing as much as cooking." She helped him to his feet, handed him a walking stick her father had carved years ago. "Take this. And Tommy, be more careful around the horses. They're not mean, but they're big and they spook easy." "Yes, ma'am." After he limped out, Clara stood at the sink washing blood from her hands and thinking about healing, about how much care it took to mend broken things, how patience was required to set bones and soothe wounds, about how some damage couldn't be fixed, only endured until you were strong enough to escape it. Friday dawned clear and hot. Clara woke with her stomach in knots, knowing tomorrow was the day. She moved through her chores mechanically, mind elsewhere, planning and replanning every detail. When Randall announced at lunch that he'd definitely be going to town the next afternoon, she had to hide her relief behind a neutral nod. That evening, as she was locking up the chicken coop, Elias appeared beside her like a shadow. "You ready for tomorrow?" he asked quietly. "As ready as I'll ever be." "I've got the camera arranged. My friend will be waiting at the line shack with the equipment. Soon as I get the ledgers, I'll ride them up there. He'll photograph every page, and I'll have them back in Randall's office within 3 hours. What if he comes home early? Then you distract him. Tell him you need help with something heavy, or the stove smoking, or whatever you have to say to keep him away from his office until I can get the books back." Elias's voice was calm, but intense. "Clara, I need you to promise me something. If this goes wrong, if Randall catches us, you run. Don't try to explain, don't try to protect me. Just get on a horse and ride for the Mitchell place. They'll help you." "I'm not leaving you to face him alone." "Yes, you are. That's not negotiable." His hand found her arm in the darkness, squeezed gently. "I can handle Randall, but I can't do this if I'm worried about you getting hurt. Promise me." Clara wanted to argue, but she heard the steel beneath his concern. "I promise." "Good." He released her arm. "Get some sleep tonight. Tomorrow changes everything." He melted back into the shadows, leaving Clara alone with the chickens and her racing heart. She finished her task and returned to the house where Randall sat in the parlor with his accounts spread around him, the very ledgers they'd soon be stealing. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Going to bed," she announced. He waved dismissively without looking up. "Fine, just be up early. I want a big breakfast before I head to town." In her room, Clara lay awake for hours, listening to the house settle and creak. She thought about her father, wondered what he'd think of what she was about to do. Part of her felt like she was betraying his memory by going behind Randall's back, by plotting and scheming instead of enduring with grace. But another part, the part that was tired of bruises and fear, knew Thomas Wynne would never have wanted this life for his daughter. He'd taught her to stand up for herself, to value her own worth, to never let anyone diminish her spirit. Randall had tried to beat those lessons out of her, but they'd survived, buried deep and waiting for someone like Elias to help her remember them. Saturday morning arrived with cruel slowness. Clara made Randall his breakfast: eggs, bacon, biscuits with gravy, coffee strong enough to strip paint. He ate with satisfaction, discussing his plans for the poker game, how much he intended to win, which of the town fools he'd be taking money from. "Don't wait up," he said, pushing back from the table. "I'll likely stay at the hotel if the game runs late." "Yes, sir." Clara cleared his plate, willing her hands not to shake. By 11 o'clock, he was dressed in his town clothes, clean shirt, vest, his best hat. He checked his appearance in the hall mirror, pocketed his money, and headed for the door. "Clara, Anna," he bellowed. She appeared from the kitchen, heart pounding. "Yes?" "Don't burn the place down while I'm gone. And if that Kane fellow comes sniffing around the house, you send him away. Hear me?" "I hear you." He studied her for a long moment, and Clara forced herself to meet his gaze calmly. Finally, he grunted and walked out. She watched through the window as he saddled his horse, checked his rifle, and rode toward the gate. The moment he disappeared over the ridge, Clara released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. It was noon, she had hours, but every minute felt precious and dangerous. She found Elias in the barn as planned, ostensibly cleaning stalls but really just waiting. When she appeared, he set down his pitchfork. "He's gone." "Good." Elias wiped his hands on his pants. "Give him 20 minutes to get well down the trail, then get those keys. I'll position myself where I can see the road. If he comes back for any reason, I'll signal you." Clara nodded, mouth too dry for speech. She returned to the house and forced herself to wait, watching the clock hands crawl. At 12:30, she climbed the stairs to Randall's room. The door opened with a creak that sounded thunderous in the quiet house. Inside, the room smelled of whiskey and old cigars, masculine and oppressive. Clara had cleaned this space 1,000 times, but never dared search it. Now she crossed to the dresser with her heart hammering so hard she was sure it could be heard downstairs. The top drawer stuck slightly. It always did, swollen from humidity. She tugged it open and found the usual clutter of collar studs, cufflinks, a deck of marked cards that didn't surprise her at all. And there, beneath a stack of handkerchiefs, the key ring. 3 keys, just as she'd remembered. Brass, worn smooth from handling. She picked them up carefully, closed the drawer, and turned to leave. A board creaked in the hallway. Clara froze, keys clutched in her suddenly sweating palm. Had someone come upstairs? Was Randall back already? She held her breath, listening with every nerve. Nothing. Just the house settling, old wood adjusting to temperature changes. She released her breath slowly and made herself walk calmly from the room, down the stairs, through the kitchen to the back door, where Elias waited just out of sight around the corner. "Got them," she whispered, pressing the keys into his hand. "Good work." He looked toward the road one more time, then back at her. "Lock yourself in the house. Don't answer the door for anyone but me. And if something goes wrong, I know, the Mitchell place, I remember." He squeezed her hand briefly, then was gone, moving with purpose toward the main house's office. Clara watched him pick the lock with surprising skill, another talent she hadn't known he possessed, and slip inside. Through the window, she could see him cross to the large oak desk where Randall conducted business. Clara retreated to the kitchen and tried to occupy herself with washing dishes, but her eyes kept returning to the clock. 12:45. 1 o'clock. Every minute stretched like hours. At 1:15, Elias emerged carrying a leather satchel, the ranch accounts, 5 years of records. He caught Clara's eye through the window, nodded once, and headed for the barn. Moments later, she heard hoofbeats as he rode out toward the high country and the waiting photographer. Now came the hardest part, waiting. Clara threw herself into work, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind occupied. She scrubbed floors that didn't need scrubbing, reorganized cupboards that were already organized, baked bread they didn't need. The physical labor helped burn off nervous energy, but time still crawled. 2 o'clock, 2:30, 3. At 3:15, she heard hoofbeats on the road and her heart stopped. But it was just a couple of ranch hands returning from checking fence line, not Randall. They waved as they passed the house, and Clara waved back with a smile that felt like it might crack her face. 3:30, 4. At 4:15, Elias came riding back hard, the satchel still strapped to his saddle. He dismounted in one smooth motion and hurried to the office. Clara watched from the window as he carefully replaced the ledgers exactly as they'd been, relocked the desk, and exited. He was at the back door 30 seconds later. "It's done," he said, handing her the keys. "Every page photographed. My friend's developing them tonight. We'll have prints by tomorrow afternoon." Clara's knees felt weak with relief. "Any problems?" "None. The books were organized chronologically, made it easy to photograph in sequence." His expression turned grim. "Clara, what I saw in those ledgers, it's worse than I thought. He's not just skimming profits. He's been systematically draining the ranch, selling off stock without recording it, pocketing payments from buyers. And there's a mortgage, a big one, that I'm betting you don't know about." "A mortgage?" Clara felt cold. "On what?" "The entire property, taken out 2 years ago for $5,000. At the rate he's paying it down, or not paying it down, the ranch will be foreclosed within a year." The news hit Clara like a physical blow. $5,000. Her father had owned this land free and clear, had worked his entire life to build something solid and permanent, and Randall had mortgaged their legacy, gambled it away at poker tables, and spent it on whiskey. "He's going to lose the ranch," she said numbly. "Everything my father built, gone." "Not if we stop him." Elias's voice was fierce. "That's what this evidence is for. We take it to a judge, prove he's been defrauding you, force a legal separation of assets. Your half can't be foreclosed if it's not attached to his debts." "My half," Clara laughed bitterly. "Even if we win, half of nothing is still nothing." "It's not nothing, it's land, Clara. Land has value, with or without the improvements. We can rebuild." "We," he'd said. The word hung between them, implying a future Clara didn't dare imagine yet. "First things first," she said, forcing herself to focus. "I need to put these keys back before Randall comes home." She climbed the stairs again, replaced the key ring exactly where she'd found it, and returned to the kitchen. Elias had already gone back to the barn, maintaining the pretense that nothing unusual had happened. Clara started dinner preparation, trying to act normal despite the adrenaline still singing through her veins. Randall returned at dusk, drunk and belligerent. He'd lost at poker, apparently, and was in a foul mood. Clara served him dinner in silence while he cursed his bad luck, and the cheating bastards at the card table. When he finally stumbled off to bed around 9 o'clock, she allowed herself to breathe again. She stood at her window, looking toward the bunkhouse, and thought about ledgers full of theft and betrayal, about a mortgage that threatened to steal her father's legacy, about a man who'd risked everything to help her fight back. Tomorrow, they'd have proof. Photographs documenting years of fraud. Evidence that could set her free or get them both killed depending on how carefully they played the next moves. Clara touched her bandaged arm, felt the dull ache of healing wounds beneath the cloth, and she thought about Elias's words from days ago. Sometimes risk is the price of freedom. She was ready to pay that price, whatever it cost. Sunday morning arrived with deceptive peace. Clara woke to birdsong and golden light, and for one disoriented moment forgot about ledgers and theft and the dangerous game they were playing. Then reality crashed back and her stomach clenched with anxiety. Elias's friend was developing the photographs. By afternoon, they'd have concrete proof of Randall's crimes. The question was what to do with it, and how to stay alive long enough to use it. She dressed and went downstairs to find Randall already at the kitchen table, nursing his hangover with black coffee and a thunderous expression. Clara moved quietly, setting out bread and butter, trying to be invisible. "Lost $300 last night," he muttered. $300 goddamn dollars to a cattle buyer from Cheyenne who couldn't possibly have that many aces without cheating. Clara said nothing, just poured him more coffee. "And that bastard Morrison had the nerve to suggest I pay down my tab at his store before extending more credit." Randall's voice rose. "Like I'm some kind of deadbeat. I own 200 acres and 2,000 head. I'm good for the money." 200 acres that were mortgaged to the hilt, Clara thought, but didn't say. 2,000 head that Randall had been steadily selling off the books to fund his gambling. She kept her face carefully neutral and began scrambling eggs. Randall's mood didn't improve as the morning wore on. He snapped at the hands during the morning meeting, kicked a dog that got underfoot, and threw a wrench across the barn when a repair didn't go his way. By noon, everyone on the ranch was walking on eggshells, trying to avoid becoming the target of his temper. Clara was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard raised voices from the yard. Through the window, she saw Randall confronting Elias near the corral, both men tense. "I don't pay you to question my decisions," Randall was saying, loud enough for Clara to hear clearly. "If I say we're driving those steers to market in 2 weeks, that's what we're doing." 2 weeks isn't enough time," Elias replied, his voice calmer but firm. "The cattle need another month of fattening, and the hands need training on the route. Push too fast and we'll lose animals on the trail." "I'll lose more money waiting. The prices are good now. By October, they'll drop." "Not if the cattle arrive half-starved and worthless." Randall's face purpled. "You calling me stupid?" "I'm saying patience will pay better than haste." Elias didn't back down, didn't show fear, and Clara's heart squeezed with worry. He was pushing too hard, letting his principles override his survival instincts. "You're fired," Randall said flatly. "Get your gear and get off my property, now." The words hung in the afternoon heat. Several hands had stopped working to watch, and Clara pressed her hand against the window glass as if she could somehow reach through and stop what was happening. "You're making a mistake," Elias said quietly. "The only mistake I made was hiring you in the first place. Should have known a man who starts by disrespecting me would be trouble." Randall stepped closer, aggressive. "You've got 1 hour. After that, I come looking for you with a rifle." Elias held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once and walked toward the bunkhouse. Clara watched him go, panic rising in her throat. They'd planned to wait until they had the photographs, until they could move carefully and legally. But now Elias was being forced out, and their entire plan was collapsing. She had to do something. Clara left the kitchen through the back door and circled around toward the bunkhouse, keeping out of Randall's sight. She found Elias inside, throwing his few belongings into a worn saddlebag with controlled fury. "Elias," she whispered urgently from the doorway. He looked up, and his expression softened when he saw her. "You shouldn't be here. If Randall sees, I don't care anymore." She stepped inside, keeping her voice low. "What about the photographs? What about the plan?" "The plan just changed." He continued packing with quick efficiency. "My friend was supposed to bring the prints to the line shack this afternoon. I'll meet him there, then ride for Laramie and file the complaint with the territorial judge before Randall knows what's happening." "And leave me here alone with him?" Clara's voice cracked. Elias, when he finds out what we've done, which is why you're not staying. He stopped packing and looked at her directly. Clara, I want you to leave with me, right now. We'll get the photographs, go straight to Laramie, and file everything at once. By the time Randall realizes you're gone, you'll be under legal protection. Just leave? Without anything, without... She gestured helplessly around. This is my home, my father's ranch. It's also a trap that's about to spring shut. Elias crossed to her, took her shoulders gently. Listen to me. Once that complaint is filed, Randall will know you were involved. He'll know you helped gather evidence against him. Do you really think he'll let that go unpunished? Clara thought about the whip, about casual cruelty that had escalated over 4 years, about a man who viewed her as property rather than person. She thought about what Randall might do when he realized she'd betrayed him. I'm scared, she admitted. I know, but staying is scarier than leaving, even if it doesn't feel that way right now. His hand slid down her arms, careful of her wounds. Trust me, Clara, please. She looked into his gray eyes and saw certainty there and concern and something deeper that made her chest ache. He was asking her to take a leap into the unknown, to trade the devil she knew for possibilities she could barely imagine. What do I bring? She asked, and watched relief flood his face. Only what you can carry. Change of clothes, any money you have access to, documents if there are any, your parents' marriage certificate, your birth record, the original ranch deed if you can get it. Things that prove your legal claim. Clara's mind raced. The deed is in Randall's safe. I don't have the combination. Then we leave it. We have the photographs. That's enough. He glanced toward the window, checking for observers. Pack quickly. Can you be ready in 20 minutes? Yes. Good. There's a place about 2 miles north of the Line Shack, a creek crossing with a big lightning-struck pine. Meet me there at 3 o'clock. I'll have horses and supplies ready. Why not just leave together now? Because if Randall sees us ride out together, he'll follow immediately. This way, I'm just another fired hand leaving, and you're just going about your day. By the time he realizes you're missing, we'll have hours of lead time. Elias picked up his saddlebag, settled his hat on his head. 3 o'clock, Clara. Don't be late. He slipped out the back way, moving like smoke through the afternoon shadows. Clara watched him go, then hurried back to the house via a circuitous route. Her heart hammered so hard she felt lightheaded, but her mind was strangely clear. She was leaving, actually leaving. After 4 years of captivity, she was about to walk away from this prison and never look back. In her room, Clara pulled out the small carpet bag she'd used for childhood trips to town. Into it went 2 dresses, undergarments, her mother's silver brush, the photograph of her parents on their wedding day. She rolled up the quilt her grandmother had made, tied it with string. From beneath her mattress, she retrieved the small cache of money she'd been secretly hoarding. $37 saved from household accounts over 3 years, coins and bills wrapped in cloth. Documents were harder. Her birth certificate was somewhere in Randall's office, and she didn't dare risk searching for it. But she remembered her mother's jewelry box, still tucked in the back of the hall closet where it had been stored after her death. Clara retrieved it quietly, found her parents' marriage certificate folded at the bottom along with her mother's wedding ring. She slipped the ring onto her own finger. It fit perfectly, and tucked the certificate into her bag. What else? She looked around her childhood room at all the things that had marked her life here. Books, trinkets, the pressed flowers from her 16th birthday. She couldn't take it all, could barely take any of it. In the end, she grabbed her father's pocket watch from her dresser, the one item of his she'd managed to keep, and her mother's cameo brooch. The bag was full. Not heavy, but weighted with memory and meaning. Clara changed into her riding dress and sturdiest boots, then hid the carpet bag under her bed. She had 2 hours until the meeting time. 2 hours to maintain the illusion that everything was normal. She returned downstairs to find Randall in the parlor, reviewing papers and drinking steadily. Clara prepared a light lunch he didn't eat, washed dishes he didn't acknowledge, swept floors he didn't see. She was already a ghost in his house, invisible unless he needed something to break. At 2:30, she went upstairs on the pretense of changing linens. She grabbed her bag, slipped down the back stairs, and exited through the kitchen door. No one was in sight. The hands were all out working, and Randall was absorbed in his drinking and brooding. Clara walked toward the chicken coop as if to gather eggs, then continued past it toward the tree line. Her heart pounded with every step, certain someone would shout, would notice, would raise the alarm. But the ranch remained quiet behind her as she entered the forest. The walk to the meeting spot took 30 minutes of pushing through undergrowth and following deer trails. Clara's dress snagged on branches, her bag grew heavy, but she kept moving. When she finally reached the creek crossing with its lightning-scarred pine, Elias was already waiting with 2 saddled horses and a pack mule loaded with supplies. "You came," he said, and the relief in his voice told her he'd been genuinely worried she might change her mind. "Did you doubt me?" "No, but I wouldn't have blamed you if you had." He helped her secure her bag to one of the saddles, then handed her the reins of a steady-looking mare. "This is Rosie. She's calm and sure-footed. Just trust her, and she'll get you where you need to go." Clara mounted with practiced ease, one skill her father had insisted on, and settled into the saddle. The simple act of sitting a horse, of being mobile and in control of her own movement, felt unexpectedly powerful. Elias swung onto his own mount, a rangy gelding she recognized from the ranch string. "We ride north to the line shack, get the photographs from my friend, then head east toward Laramie. It's about 80 miles. We'll need to push hard to make it in 2 days. And if Randall follows? Then we move faster." His expression was grim. "I won't lie to you, Clara. The next couple days are going to be hard. But once we reach Laramie and file that complaint, you'll be under legal protection. He won't be able to touch you." They rode out at a steady trot, following the creek upstream toward higher ground. The afternoon sun slanted through the pines, painting everything gold and green, and Clara tried to memorize the beauty even as fear churned her stomach. This was her home territory, land she'd known all her life. Soon she'd be in unfamiliar country, trusting a man she'd known only weeks to guide her to safety. It should have felt more frightening than it did. Instead, there was an unexpected sense of rightness, as if some locked door inside her had finally opened. They reached the line shack at 4 o'clock. Elias's friend, a wiry man named Jim with ink-stained fingers and a portable camera, was waiting inside with an envelope of photographs. 23 pages, clear as day," Jim said, handing them over. "Everything you asked for. That's some ugly business in those ledgers, Kane." "I know." Elias flipped through the photographs quickly, checking quality. Clara looked over his shoulder and saw her father's ranch reduced to columns of numbers, each entry a tiny theft, a slow bleeding of everything Thomas Wynne had built. "Thank you, Jim. I owe you." "Just take care of the lady. And Kane?" Jim's expression turned serious. "I heard Wynne fired you. He's been in town talking about how you tried to steal from him, how you're not to be trusted. He's building a story before you can tell yours." Elias's jaw tightened. "Of course he is. All the more reason we need to get to Laramie fast." They said their goodbyes and remounted. The ride down the mountain was tense, every snapping twig making Clara's heart jump, but they made it to the main trail without incident and turned east, away from the ranch, away from everything Clara had ever known. They rode until dark, covering nearly 20 miles before Elias called a halt in a small hollow, sheltered by rocks. He unsaddled the horses while Clara gathered firewood, both of them moving with practiced efficiency. "No fire," Elias said. "Can't risk the smoke being spotted." So they ate cold biscuits and jerky in the darkness, sitting close together for warmth as the temperature dropped. Above them, stars emerged in impossible profusion, the Milky Way a river of light across the black. "I used to watch the stars with my father," Clara said softly. "He knew all the constellations, all the stories. He'd say that as long as you could see the stars, you could find your way home." "Do you feel lost?" Elias asked. "No." She surprised herself with the answer. "I feel like maybe I'm finally finding my way, even if it's not the way I expected." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, shoulders touching. Finally, Clara asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Elias, what happens after Laramie? If we win, if the judge rules in my favor, what then?" "Then you get your inheritance secured, free from Randall's debts. The ranch might have to be sold to settle the mortgage, but you'd get your share of whatever's left." He paused. "And then you'd be free to do whatever you want. Stay in Wyoming, move to Denver with my sister, start fresh somewhere new. Your choice." "And you?" She turned to look at him in the starlight. What will you do? That depends. His voice was careful. On whether you want company or prefer to be alone. Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. I think I've been alone long enough. Elias's hand found hers in the darkness, fingers interlacing. Then I'll stay, as long as you'll have me. They didn't kiss, didn't make promises beyond that simple commitment, but they sat together under the stars, holding hands like young people at a church social, and Clara felt something she hadn't felt in 4 years, hope that didn't hurt. They slept in shifts, one keeping watch while the other dozed. When dawn came gray and cold, they were already riding, pushing the horses as hard as they dared without foundering them. By mid-morning of the second day, they'd covered 40 miles and were crossing into unfamiliar territory. The land here was more open, fewer trees and more grass, with the mountains a blue shadow behind them. Clara's body ached from hours in the saddle, but she didn't complain. Pain meant progress, meant distance from Randall. Around noon, Elias suddenly reined in his horse. We've got company. Clara looked back and saw what he'd spotted, dust rising on the trail behind them, multiple riders moving fast. Her blood turned to ice. How many? She asked. 4, maybe 5. Elias's face was grim. Clara, we need to move. Now. They kicked their horses into a gallop, the pack mules struggling to keep up. Behind them, the dust cloud grew closer. Whoever was following knew this country and was gaining ground. There's a canyon up ahead, Elias shouted over the thunder of hooves. If we can reach it before they catch us, we might be able to lose them in the rocks. Clara leaned low over Rosie's neck, urging the mare faster. The canyon mouth appeared ahead, a narrow cut between red stone walls. They plunged into it as the first gunshot cracked across the distance. The bullet struck stone somewhere to their left, ricocheting with a whine. Clara's mare shied but kept running, sure-footed even on the rocky ground. Behind them, more shots, and then Randall's voice echoing off the canyon walls. Clara, you think you can run from me? I own you. The words sent rage through her fear. She wasn't his property, wasn't his possession. She was her father's daughter, and she was done running. Elias, she called. We need to make a stand. Not here. Too exposed. Another quarter mile there's a side canyon, defensible position. He glanced back, judging distances. Think you can make it? I'll make it. They raced deeper into the canyon, hooves clattering on stone, the walls rising steep on either side. Clara could hear their pursuers now, could distinguish Randall's curses from the shouts of the ranch hands he'd brought with him. The side canyon appeared on their right, barely wide enough for the horses. They plunged into it and dismounted quickly, Elias pulling his rifle from its scabbard and checking the load. How many bullets do you have? Clara asked, tying the horses where they'd be protected. 20 rounds. You know how to shoot? My father taught me. She grabbed the spare revolver from Elias's saddlebag, checked the cylinder. 6 shots. Not many, but more than nothing. They positioned themselves behind rocks near the canyon entrance, where they had clear sight lines but good cover. Within minutes, Randall and his men appeared at the mouth of the side canyon, 4 riders including her uncle, all armed. Clara, Randall bellowed, come out now and I'll go easy on you. Stay with that drifter and you're both dead. Elias raised his voice in response. You're not taking her back, Wynn. We have evidence of your crimes, photographs of your ledgers showing years of theft and fraud. It's over. A moment of silence, then Randall's ugly laugh. Evidence? You think anyone will believe a fired hand and a hysterical woman over a respected rancher? You're delusional. The numbers don't lie, and a territorial judge will see them for what they are. Elias kept his rifle trained on the canyon mouth. Right away, Wynn. You can't win this. Can I? Another shot cracked out, striking near Elias's position. I've got 4 guns to your 2 and we can wait you out. No water in that dead-end canyon, Kane. How long before you get thirsty? Clara realized with sinking dread that he was right. They'd ridden into a trap, and Randall had all the advantages of patience and numbers. But then she remembered something, a detail from childhood explorations with her father. This canyon had a back way out, a narrow chimney that led up to the rim. It was dangerous, barely climbable, but possible for someone desperate enough. Elias, she whispered, I know a way out. She explained quickly, and saw understanding dawn in his eyes. It's risky. Everything about this is risky. But if we stay here, we lose. If we climb, we might have a chance. He studied her face, then nodded. We do it together. Stay low. They retreated deeper into the canyon, where the walls pinched together and a narrow crack led upward. Clara went first, finding handholds in the rough stone, climbing with the remembered confidence of her younger self when fear hadn't lived in her bones yet. Below, Randall's men were advancing cautiously, calling out threats and promises. The climb was harder than Clara remembered. 30 feet of vertical stone with her dress catching on every protrusion and her arms burning with effort. But she kept moving, driven by determination and the knowledge that failure meant returning to captivity. She reached the rim and rolled over the edge just as Elias's head appeared below her. She grabbed his arm, helped haul him up, and they lay gasping on the sun-baked rock. The horses, Clara panted. We'll have to leave them. Can't get them up here. Elias crawled to the rim, looked down into the canyon where Randall's men had just discovered their escape route. But we're on foot now, and they'll be after us the second they realize where we went. They ran, stumbling across broken ground toward the next canyon system. Behind them, shouts of discovery and fury. Ahead, uncertain terrain and 40 more miles to Laramie. Claire's lungs burned and her legs screamed, but she kept moving. Because this was what freedom cost: sweat and pain and risk. And she was finally willing to pay it. They ran until the canyon swallowed them, until Randall's curses faded behind stone walls, until they were alone again with just each other and the photograph stuffed in Elias's shirt and the vast Wyoming wilderness stretching endlessly ahead. They ran until Clara's vision blurred and her legs threatened to buckle, until the canyon walls rose around them like cathedral walls and the afternoon sun turned the red stone to fire. When Elias finally called a halt in a shadowed alcove, Clara collapsed against the rock face, chest heaving, tasting blood in her throat. "We need water," she gasped. Elias nodded, his own face flushed with exertion. "There's a spring about a mile east if I'm reading the terrain right. But Clara—" He touched her shoulder gently. "Can you make it another mile?" She wanted to say no, wanted to curl up in this shaded spot and never move again. But behind them somewhere, Randall was still hunting, still driven by rage and wounded pride. So she pushed herself upright and nodded. "I can make it." They walked this time rather than ran, conserving what little energy remained. The canyon branched and branched again, a labyrinth of stone that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Clara tried to mark their path mentally, but quickly lost track. She could only trust that Elias knew where he was leading them. The spring, when they found it, was a miracle, clear water seeping from the rock face to form a small pool before disappearing underground again. They drank greedily, splashed their faces, filled the single canteen Elias had managed to grab during their escape. The water was cold enough to make Clara's teeth ache, and sweet enough to make her want to cry with gratitude. "We can't stay long," Elias said, scanning the canyon rim above them. "But we need a plan. On foot it'll take us 4 or 5 days to reach Laramie. We have 1 canteen, no food, and Randall knows this country as well as I do." "Better, probably," Clara said grimly. "He's been ranching here for years. But he's also mounted, which means he'll stick to the main trails and established routes. If we go cross-country, through terrain horses can't handle, we might be able to lose him." Elias pulled out the photographs, checked that they hadn't been damaged during the climb. "These are our priority. As long as we have these, we have leverage." Clara studied the envelope, thinking about all those columns of numbers, all that evidence of betrayal. "Elias, what if we don't make it? What if he catches us, or we die out here and the photographs are lost? Then Randall wins and continues bleeding that ranch dry until the bank forecloses. And you—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "I won't let that happen. I promised you I'd help you get free, and I keep my promises." The fierce certainty in his voice steadied something inside Clara. She'd spent 4 years feeling helpless, feeling like circumstances controlled her rather than the other way around. But here in this canyon, running for her life with nothing but the clothes on her back and a man she'd known barely a month, she felt more powerful than she had in years. "We keep moving," she said. "Put as much distance as we can between us and Randall before dark. Then we rest and start again at first light." "You sure?" "You've been pushing hard. I'll rest when I'm free. Not before." Something flickered in Elias's eyes. Respect, maybe, or admiration. He nodded and stood, offering his hand to help her up. Then let's move. They walked until the sun touched the western rim, turning the sky orange and purple and gold. The canyon eventually opened onto a high mesa dotted with juniper and sage, and they stopped in a cluster of rocks that offered shelter from the wind and concealment from anyone searching. They had no food, no blankets, no fire. But they had each other and the slowly cooling rocks that had soaked up the day's heat, and it would have to be enough. Clara sat with her back against warm stone, watching stars emerge one by one. Her body ached in places she hadn't known could ache, and her riding dress was torn in a dozen places. But she felt strangely alive, aware of every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of existence in a way she hadn't been when survival meant simply enduring another day in Randall's house. Here. Elias settled beside her, draping his coat over her shoulders. It'll get cold once the rocks lose their heat. You'll freeze. I'll manage. He stretched out his long legs, tilted his head back to look at the stars. You did well today, Clara. Better than well. Most people raised soft would have given up hours ago. I wasn't raised soft. My father believed in teaching me to survive, not just exist. She pulled the coat tighter, catching Elias's scent in the fabric, horse and leather, and something uniquely him. He used to say that comfort was a luxury, but capability was a necessity. I think he knew somehow that I'd need to be strong. He'd be proud of you. What you're doing, standing up to Randall, that takes more than strength. It takes courage. Clara thought about that, about the difference between strength and courage. I'm terrified, she admitted. Every minute of the past 2 days, I've been absolutely terrified. Does that make me a coward? No, it makes you human. Elias turned to look at her, his face shadowed in the starlight. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. And you've been doing that from the moment you decided to gather evidence against your uncle. They sat in silence for a while, the desert night settling around them with its particular stillness. In the distance, a coyote called, lonely and wild. Clara found herself thinking about her father again, about the stories he'd told of building the ranch from nothing, of the risks he'd taken and the gambles that had paid off. Elias, she said quietly, what you said back at the ranch about me becoming important to you, did you mean it? She felt rather than saw his smile. Every word. Even though we barely know each other, even though everything's been chaos and danger and running for our lives. Maybe especially because of all that. When you're stripped down to essentials, when there's no room for pretense or performance, you see people as they really are. He shifted slightly, and his shoulder pressed against hers. I've seen who you really are, Clara Wynne, and I like what I see very much. Clara's throat tightened with emotion. I like who I am when I'm with you. I like who I'm becoming, someone who fights back, who takes risks, who doesn't just accept whatever life hands her. That person was always there. You just needed someone to remind you she existed. They were sitting very close now, close enough that Clara could feel the warmth of him despite the cooling air. She thought about propriety, about all the rules she'd been taught regarding unmarried men and women alone together. Then she thought about how those same rules had kept her trapped, had made her dependent, had contributed to her captivity. To hell with propriety. She turned and kissed him. It was awkward at first. She was out of practice, had only been kissed once before by a boy at a church social years ago. But Elias responded gently, one hand coming up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with aching tenderness. The kiss deepened slowly, sweetly, until Clara felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elias rested his forehead against hers. We should probably talk about what this means, he said, voice rough. Tomorrow, when we're safe and can think clearly. Clara pulled back enough to meet his eyes. For tonight, can we just be two people who care about each other, sheltering from the storm? I can do that. He gathered her closer, tucking her against his side where she fit like she'd been made for that exact space. Get some rest, Clara. I'll keep watch. She wanted to argue, to insist on taking a turn, but exhaustion was pulling her down like an undertow. She let herself relax into his warmth, let the steady rhythm of his breathing lull her toward sleep, and thought that even here in the wilderness with danger still hunting them, she felt safer than she had in 4 years. Clara woke before dawn to find Elias already up, scanning the horizon in the gray light. She pushed herself upright, muscles protesting yesterday's abuse, and joined him. Any sign of them? No, but that doesn't mean they gave up. He handed her the canteen. Drink. We need to cover ground before the sun gets high. They walked through the morning, moving northeast across broken country that horses would find difficult. The terrain was unforgiving. Steep climbs followed by treacherous descents, loose scree that shifted underfoot, thorny brush that caught at their clothes. But it was also empty of pursuit, and that was worth every scraped hand and turned ankle. By noon, they'd put another 8 or 9 miles behind them and had found a muddy seep where they could refill the canteen. The water tasted of minerals and dirt, but it was wet, and that was enough. How much farther to Laramie? Claire asked, gnawing on some cattail roots Elias had shown her were edible. They were stringy and bitter, but took the edge off her hunger. Maybe 35 miles as the crow flies, 40 or more the way we're traveling. He studied the landscape, calculating. If we keep this pace, we could make it in 3 days, assuming we don't run into trouble. And if we do run into trouble, then we adapt. That's all we can do. He looked at her seriously. Clara, I need to ask you something. When we get to Laramie, when we file these complaints and the legal process starts, what are you hoping happens? She considered the question carefully. I want Randall held accountable for what he's done. I want the ranch's finances untangled so I get what's rightfully mine, and I want to never be at anyone's mercy ever again. She paused. But mostly, I want to be free to make my own choices. Even if they're bad choices, at least they'll be mine. Elias nodded slowly. That's fair, and for what it's worth, I'll support whatever choices you make, even if— He stopped, seemed to wrestle with something. Even if those choices don't include me. Clara's chest tightened. Is that what you think? That once I'm free, I'll just leave you behind? I think you should have the option, without guilt or obligation. She stood, brushing dirt from her ruined dress. Elias Kane, you're one of the smartest men I know, but right now you're being remarkably stupid. He blinked, surprised. I'm trying to give you space to— I don't want space. I want partnership. I want someone who sees me as an equal, who respects my choices even when they're risky, who catches whips before they land. She crossed to him, took his face in her hands. I want you. Is that clear enough? The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. Crystal clear. They kissed again, longer this time, and Clara thought that this was what freedom tasted like, choosing connection because she wanted it, not because she needed protection or had no other options. When they finally pulled apart, Elias was laughing softly. We're a mess, filthy, starving, running for our lives. This is possibly the worst time to start a romance. Or possibly the best time. We're seeing each other at our absolute worst. If we can make it through this, we can make it through anything. They walked on through the afternoon, talking to pass the time and distract from their hunger. Elias told her about growing up in Colorado, about learning to work cattle from Mexican vaqueros, who taught him that partnership with animals was more effective than domination. Clara told him about her mother, who'd been a teacher before marriage and had insisted on educating her daughter despite frontier conventions. She used to say that a woman's mind was her greatest weapon in a world designed to keep her small, Clara said. I didn't understand what she meant until after she died, and I saw how differently people treated me without her protection. Your father protected you, though. He did. But he also prepared me, taught me to ride and shoot and manage accounts. He just didn't live long enough to see those lessons fully tested. She glanced at Elias. What about your sister, the one you rescued? Lily. His expression softened. She's remarkable. Went through hell with her first husband, but came out the other side stronger. Met a shopkeeper in Denver named Samuel who worships the ground she walks on, and now she helps run his store and advocates for other women escaping bad situations. She's everything I hoped she'd become. I'd like to meet her someday. You will. She's going to love you, another stubborn woman refusing to be broken by circumstance. He squeezed her hand. After this is over, after the legal mess is settled, I thought maybe we could go to Denver. Stay with Lily and Samuel while we figure out next steps. We, Clara repeated, liking the sound of it. I think I'm getting used to that word. They made camp that night in a small canyon with a trickle of water and enough sheltering rocks to hide their presence. Elias caught a rabbit using a snare he'd fashioned from his bootlaces, and they risked a small fire to cook it. The meat was tough and gamey but tasted like the finest steak to Clara's empty stomach. After eating, Elias pulled out the photographs again, studying them in the firelight. His expression grew increasingly grim as he reviewed the evidence. "It's worse than I thought," he said finally. "Randall's been falsifying records for at least 3 years. He sold off breeding stock your father spent decades developing and pocketed the money without recording the sales. He took out loans using the ranch as collateral and used the funds for gambling debts. And the mortgage, Clara, he mortgaged the property for almost twice what it was actually worth by inflating the asset valuation. Can he be prosecuted for that? Fraud, embezzlement, possibly forgery if he falsified your signature on any documents." Elias tapped the photographs. "With this evidence, a judge could order a full audit, freeze his assets, maybe even bring criminal charges. At minimum, you'd get your inheritance separated from his debts and mismanagement." Clara stared into the fire, processing. "The ranch will probably have to be sold to settle everything." "Maybe. Or maybe the bank would be willing to refinance under new management that actually knows how to run a cattle operation." He looked at her meaningfully. "You know this land, Clara. You could run it." "A woman rancher?" She laughed bitterly. "The bank would never approve the loan." "Not if you're operating alone. But if you had a partner, someone with experience and good references, that might change the equation." Elias fed another stick to the fire. "I'm not proposing anything hasty, but I want you to know it's an option. We could rebuild together if that's what you wanted." The offer caught Clara off guard, not because it was unwelcome, but because it represented a future she'd barely dared imagine. Running her father's ranch, not as a servant but as an owner. Building something instead of watching it deteriorate. Creating a partnership based on mutual respect rather than power and control. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that very much. But let's survive the next 3 days before we start planning the next 3 decades. He smiled. "Fair enough." That night, they took turns keeping watch while the others slept. When Clara woke for her shift around midnight, she found Elias had built up the fire and arranged rocks to reflect heat toward where she'd been sleeping. Small kindnesses that spoke louder than grand gestures. She spent her watch time thinking about the future, about possibilities that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. She thought about her father and wished he could see her now, not cowering in Randall's shadow, but fighting for what was hers. She thought about her mother's lessons on women's strength and realized she was finally learning to embody them. When dawn came on their 3rd day of walking, they could see the mountains changing shape ahead, the sign they were approaching Laramie. The landscape was opening up too, fewer canyons and more rolling grassland, easier traveling but also less cover. "We need to be careful from here," Elias warned. "Once we're in open country, we're visible for miles." They moved cautiously, using what terrain features they could for concealment. Around mid-morning, they spotted riders in the distance. 3 men on horseback, too far away to identify, but heading generally in their direction. "Is it them?" Clara asked, her heart rate spiking. Elias studied the riders through squinted eyes. "Can't tell for certain, but we can't risk it. There's a creek bed about half a mile south. We can follow it and stay below the sight line." They made for the creek at a pace just short of running. The dry wash was deeper than expected, easily tall enough to hide them while standing, and it ran roughly parallel to their needed direction. They walked in the sandy bottom for over an hour, hearing hoofbeats pass somewhere above them but never seeing their pursuers. When they finally emerged, the riders were gone, and Laramie was visible on the horizon, a collection of buildings huddled against the plains, the territorial capital and their salvation. "We're going to make it," Clara breathed. "Not there yet," Elias cautioned, but she could hear the relief in his voice too. "Another 4 or 5 miles." Those final miles felt longer than all the previous days combined. Clara's feet were blistered, her dress was more tear than fabric, and she was so hungry her stomach had stopped growling and gone numb. But she kept walking, kept moving, because the alternative was unthinkable. They reached the outskirts of Laramie in late afternoon, 2 ragged figures emerging from the wilderness like refugees from a disaster. People stared as they passed, but Clara was beyond caring about appearances. She'd spent 4 years maintaining propriety, and look where it had gotten her. Elias led them directly to the courthouse, a sturdy brick building that represented order and justice and everything Clara had been denied. Inside, a clerk looked up from his desk with barely concealed shock. "We need to see Judge Harrison," Elias said firmly. "It's urgent." "The judge doesn't see people without appointments. He'll see us." Elias pulled out the envelope of photographs. "We have evidence of fraud and embezzlement involving a significant property. This can't wait." Something in his tone must have convinced the clerk, because the man disappeared into a back office and returned moments later with an older gentleman in shirt sleeves, Judge Martin Harrison, whose reputation for fairness was known throughout the territory. "I'm told you have urgent business," the judge said, looking them over with keen eyes that missed nothing. "We do, Your Honor." Clara found her voice, straightened her spine despite exhaustion. "My name is Clara Wynne. My uncle has been systematically defrauding me of my inheritance, and we have documentary proof." The judge gestured them into his office. "Then you'd better show me." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of explanations and evidence review. Judge Harrison studied the photographs with increasing seriousness, asking pointed questions that demonstrated a sharp legal mind. When Clara described Randall's treatment of her, including the physical abuse, the judge's expression hardened. "These photographs," he said finally, "do they accurately represent the original ledgers?" "Yes, Your Honor," Elias confirmed. "They were taken by a professional photographer using proper equipment. Every page, every entry is documented." "And you witnessed Mr. Randall Wynn's abuse of his niece?" "Multiple times, sir, including an incident where he attempted to strike her with a whip. That's what prompted me to intervene." Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Miss Wynne, what is it you're seeking from the court?" Clara took a breath, marshaling her thoughts. "I want a legal separation of my assets from my uncle's debts and mismanagement. I want an accounting of what was rightfully my inheritance from my father, and I want protection from my uncle's retaliation." "That last part may be most urgent," the judge said. "If your uncle believes you filed against him, he may become dangerous." "He already is dangerous, Your Honor. That's why we're here." The judge nodded slowly. "I'm going to issue an emergency order freezing the ranch assets pending a full investigation. I'll also issue a restraining order preventing your uncle from approaching you. If he violates it, he'll be subject to immediate arrest." He began writing rapidly. "Additionally, I'm appointing a temporary administrator for the ranch, someone neutral who can manage operations while the investigation proceeds." Relief flooded through Clara so powerfully she felt lightheaded. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me yet. This is just the beginning of what will likely be a lengthy legal process." He looked at Elias. "Young man, I'll need a sworn statement from you regarding what you witnessed. Can you provide that?" "Yes, sir. Whatever's needed." By the time they left the courthouse, the sun was setting and Clara was swaying on her feet. Judge Harrison had arranged for them to stay at a boarding house under court protection, with meals and clean clothes provided at county expense until the immediate crisis passed. The boarding house proprietor, a stern woman named Mrs. Chen, took one look at Clara and ushered her directly to a room with a bathtub. "Hot water, soap, and then bed," she ordered. "You look like death warmed over, child." Clara didn't argue. She sank into the hot water and felt 4 years of tension begin to dissolve. She scrubbed away dirt and blood and fear. And when she finally emerged clean and dressed in borrowed nightclothes, she barely recognized herself in the mirror. She looked younger somehow, or maybe just less haunted. She found Elias in the dining room, already bathed and changed as well, eating bread and stew like a starving man. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "You clean up nice." "So do you." She sat across from him, accepted a bowl of stew from Mrs. Chen, and ate without speaking for several minutes. The food was simple, beef and potatoes and carrots, but it tasted like heaven. Finally, when the worst of her hunger was satisfied, Clara set down her spoon. "We did it. We actually did it." "We did." Elias reached across the table, took her hand. "You did most of it, Clara. I just helped." "You did more than help. You saved me." Her throat tightened with emotion. "If you hadn't caught that whip, hadn't given me hope that escape was possible, I'd still be trapped in that house, still being hurt, still believing I had no choices." "You always had choices. You just needed someone to show you the door was unlocked." They sat together in the quiet dining room, hands clasped across scarred wood, and Clara thought about freedom. about how it wasn't a destination but a practice, a daily choice to live on your own terms, regardless of what the world expected. Over the next 2 weeks, the legal machinery ground forward. Judge Harrison's investigation uncovered even more fraud than the photographs had shown. Randall had been stealing from Clara for years, gambling away profits while letting the ranch deteriorate. The mortgage was declared fraudulent due to inflated valuations, and the bank agreed to restructure under new management. Randall himself appeared before the judge once, blustering and threatening, claiming Clara was an ungrateful child who'd conspired with a drifter to steal his property. But when confronted with the photographic evidence and Elias's testimony, his defense crumbled. He was charged with fraud, embezzlement, and assault, with trials set for the following spring. Clara testified once, telling her story in a courtroom full of strangers. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure, speaking truth after years of enforced silence. When she finished, the courtroom was silent except for the scratch of the court recorder's pen. The judge's final ruling came 3 weeks after their arrival in Laramie. The ranch was to be partitioned, half to Clara as her rightful inheritance, the other half used to settle Randall's legitimate debts. The fraudulent mortgage was voided, and Clara was granted full legal independence with the right to manage her own affairs without male guardianship. "You're free," Judge Harrison told her, signing the final order. "Legally and practically. What you do with that freedom is now your choice alone." Clara left the courthouse that day feeling like she was walking on air. Elias waited outside, leaning against the building with his hat tilted against the sun. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Terrified. Excited. Free," she laughed, the sound emerging pure and unfettered. "Is it supposed to feel this overwhelming?" "Probably. You just dismantled 4 years of oppression in 3 weeks. That's not nothing." He offered his arm. "Come on, I want to show you something." He led her through Laramie's streets to the telegraph office, where a message waited. Elias read it, smiled, and handed it to Clara. It was from his sister Lily in Denver. "Bring her home. Room ready. Can't wait to meet the woman who captured my brother's heart. All our love, Lily and Samuel." "Home," Clara repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." They left Laramie the next morning on the stage to Denver, traveling as legitimate passengers with money from the ranch settlement in Clara's pocket and legal documents proving her ownership. The journey took 3 days of dusty roads and cramped quarters, but Clara didn't mind. She was traveling towards something rather than running from it, and that made all the difference. Denver proved to be everything Elias had promised, bustling and modern, with electric lights and boardwalks and possibilities around every corner. Lily and Samuel's shop occupied a prime corner location, selling dry goods and household items to the city's growing population. Lily herself was waiting when they arrived, a small woman with Elias's gray eyes and a smile that could light up a room. She took one look at Clara and pulled her into a fierce hug. "Welcome home," she said simply. "You're safe now." And Clara, who'd spent 4 years afraid to believe in safety, finally let herself accept it. She stayed with Lily and Samuel for 3 months, recovering her health and learning what it meant to live without fear. She helped in the shop, discovered she had a knack for business, and slowly began to imagine futures that didn't involve constant vigilance. Elias stayed too, finding work at a nearby ranch while Clara sorted out her affairs. They courted properly this time. Walks in the park, dinners with Lily and Samuel, long conversations about dreams and plans and possibilities. One evening in early December, as the first snow fell over Denver, Elias took Clara to a small garden behind a church. He held both her hands and looked at her with those steady gray eyes that had first seen her as worth saving. "I love you," he said simply. "Not because you need saving, not because I feel obligated, but because you're brave and fierce and kind, and I want to spend my life building something with you. So I'm asking, Clara Wynne, will you marry me?" Clara thought about whips caught mid-swing and midnight conversations and running through canyons toward freedom. She thought about partnership and respect and the revolutionary act of choosing your own path. "Yes," she said, and kissed him under falling snow while Denver bustled around them, indifferent and beautiful. They married in March in that same garden, with Lily and Samuel as witnesses and spring flowers beginning to emerge from winter-hard ground. Clara wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself, and Elias wore his best suit with his father's watch in his pocket. Judge Harrison traveled from Laramie for the ceremony, as did Jim the photographer and several of the ranch hands who'd respected Thomas Wynn and were glad to see his daughter finally free. Randall didn't come. He was in the territorial prison awaiting trial, having violated his restraining order by attempting to approach Clara in Denver. She'd felt nothing but relief when the marshal arrested him, watching him led away in chains while she stood safe on the boardwalk beside Elias. After the wedding, Clara and Elias returned to Wyoming, not to the old ranch that had been sold to settle debts, but to a smaller property they purchased together along Cottonwood Creek. It was humble compared to Thomas Wynn's empire, but it was theirs, built on honest work and mutual respect, free from the shadows of the past. They spent their first year building a house, a barn, corrals for the horses they trained together. Clara discovered she loved the physical work, loved seeing something grow from their combined effort. Elias proved to be a patient teacher and an equal partner, never diminishing her ideas or dismissing her concerns. By their second year, they had 50 head of cattle and a reputation for quality horses. By their fifth year, they'd expanded to 100 acres and were training other ranchers in Elias's gentle methods. And by their 10th year, Cottonwood Creek Ranch was known throughout Wyoming as a model of partnership and stewardship. Clara bore 3 children in those years, 2 boys and a girl. She taught them to ride before they could properly walk, taught them that capability was more valuable than compliance, taught them that freedom was worth fighting for. And she told them stories about their grandfather Thomas Wynn, who'd built something from nothing and taught his daughter to be strong. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Clara would remember the morning Elias caught her uncle's whip, would remember the terror and the hope of that instant, the moment when her life pivoted from captivity toward freedom. She'd touch the small scar on her wrist, the only physical reminder of those dark years, and feel grateful not for the suffering but for what it had taught her about resilience. One summer evening, when her eldest son was learning to break his first horse, Clara stood at the fence watching him work. He was using Elias's methods, patience, and partnership rather than force, and the young stallion was responding beautifully. Elias joined her at the fence, slipping an arm around her waist. They'd been married 15 years now, and his presence still felt like coming home. "He's good," Elias observed, watching their son. "He learned from the best." Clara leaned into her husband's solid warmth. "Did I ever thank you properly? For that first day, for stopping Randall, for believing I was worth saving?" "Every day," Elias said softly. "Every day you choose this life, this partnership, you thank me. And Clara, you saved yourself. I just held the door." She turned to look at him, this man who'd seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway, who'd risked everything to help her find freedom. "Everything good in my life began the moment you said, 'Not again.'" "Not again," Elias repeated, pulling her closer. "Not ever again." And as the sun set over Cottonwood Creek Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Clara Wynn Kane watched her children laugh and play in the yard of the home she'd built, and thought about freedom. Real freedom. Not the absence of hardship, but the presence of choice. Not the lack of challenge, but the ability to face challenges on your own terms. She'd been a prisoner once, controlled and diminished and afraid. But she'd fought her way free, brick by brick and choice by choice, until she'd built a life that belonged entirely to her. A life of partnership rather than domination, of mutual respect rather than fear, of love that empowered rather than diminished. That night, after the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet except for the wind in the cottonwoods, Clara stood on her porch and looked at the stars. The same stars her father had taught her to navigate by all those years ago. And she understood finally what he'd meant when he'd said that as long as you could see the stars, you could find your way home. Because home wasn't a place. It was the freedom to choose your own path, the courage to walk it regardless of obstacles, and the love that made the journey worth taking. Clara had found all 3, and she would never, ever take them for granted. The wind carried the scent of sage and cattle, of growing things and honest work. Behind her, the house glowed with lamplight and the sound of Elias's voice as he told the children a bedtime story. Ahead, the Wyoming night stretched endlessly, full of stars and possibilities. Clara smiled, touched the ring on her finger. Her mother's ring, passed down through generations as a symbol of enduring love, and went inside to join her family. She was finally, completely, joyfully home.